Hi everyone, please subscribe to my channel. Blood Immortal Venerable. See playlist for other chapters and novels. I do not translate the novels. Credits goes to original translator and author of the novel. I only make it as an audiobook so it would be easier to just listen while doing other things. Credits goes to the author of the novel. I convert stories to audiobook for mental health, for multitasking purpose, for accessibility and time saving. Listening to audiobook is also beneficial for people who have disability. It improves our listening skills and improve our English comprehension, vocabulary and other things. So, thank you for listening. Thank you and thank you very much for your support. Chapter 1281, Reggie. In this environment where everyone could only exist in soul form, what was seen was not the actual strength of a true God. Instead, the true God put his internal momentum into the environment, letting the warrior comprehend his godly way by being within this environment. In effect, the warrior was within the godly way. Only one single warrior guarded the isolated city, yet he was able to fight against an army of tens of thousands of soldiers with a single saber, and he successfully fended them off. There was a domineering aura contained in his ogre warrior's body that made his foes tremble with fear. After the attack, not a single soldier from the ogre army was left standing. Of course, Zen was the only one who succeeded in dodging the saber strike, though he had to hurl himself to the ground to avoid the deadly swing. But the moment Zen got up from the ground, the ogre warrior's gaze fell on him. Under the scrutiny of this ogre warrior, Zen felt a tremendous pressure build inside his very soul. "Why don't you lie down?" Even Zen's soul trembled uncontrollably when the ogre warrior roared at him in a voice like thunder. However, there was a resolute expression in Zen's eyes as he swallowed heavily and replied coolly, "I didn't lose either of my legs, so naturally I wouldn't lie down. If you don't want to lie down, then you will kneel down." Swoosh! The ogre warrior swung the long blade in his hand and pointed it at Zen. Then the large saber moved downward with a fearsome sound. The saber did not cut into Zen's body. However, Zen instantly felt a strong pressure building behind his shoulders and trying to force him down. Under the oppression of this enormous power, Zen's knees felt weak and limp. A fierce and domineering aura was contained within this pressure, and it was as if a mountain was pressing down on Zen's body. How could he possibly withstand this? At this moment, Zen was in his soul form, and the power of this pressure was not a true physical power. Therefore, he could not use the power of the dragon scales to resist it. "Kneel down and submit to me," the ogre warrior shouted. The saber kept on moving downward, and the pressure also increased tremendously. Naturally, the force that Zen used to bear up against it also increased accordingly. In the face of such strength, Zen still stood firmly on the spot with his legs planted. The pressure mounted, and his feet were being pressed deeper into the illusionary soil as the pressure threatened to overwhelm him. His eyes were fixed intently on the ogre warrior without a hint of compromise on his face. There was no give, no surrender, and no yielding in Zen. "I do not kneel to the heavens or to the earth. I have nothing that I should feel guilty about in my life, so how could I kneel in front of you?" Zen coldly said, gritting his teeth, while still standing upright. The ogre warrior sneered, "If you don't kneel down, then you have to die." Whoosh! The large saber swung out again. An incredibly intense blade energy carried the formidable momentum of the weapon as it hacked down towards Zen. Humph! Zen retaliated with tit for tat, giving as good as he was getting. The huge sword that he had taken from an ogre soldier was too large for him to physically swing, but in this soul-level battle, it was firstly a fight based on aura, and Zen had a formidable aura. He also launched a sword counterattack. Zing! Zen's sword intent lashed out and collided with the thick blade energy of the true god, but it was instantly annihilated. The strengths of the two warriors were obviously not on the same level. Zen was sorely outmatched. When he saw this, Zen's eyes narrowed and he retreated dozens of feet back. The moment he backed away, the expression in his eyes changed. The emotions in his eyes disappeared, and were replaced with extreme coldness. God's intimidating strike. Swoosh! The God's intimidating strike was originally a sword technique that could be performed by means of a soul-level comprehension. Now that Zen was in a soul state, it meant that he could fully ignore his physical body, while wielding the sword strike. The God's intimidating strike had to be executed in a completely emotionless state, and this sword move was even purer. Zwang! When the enormous blade energy collided with Zen's sword intent, a muffled sound ruptured forth. Although this sword intent was small, it was powerful enough to destroy everything. After this collision, a crack appeared which ran along the blade energy. When the crack had spread to Zen's side, he drilled through the crack. This time, it was the ogre warrior who was surprised. Being a true god's mark, he did not have the strength of a true god. However, when he had launched the saber attack, the overbearing aura of the saber had been displayed to the extreme. Yet, it was easily fractured by this junior in front of him. Swish! The ogre warrior lashed down at Zen once again, and again the weapon's song could be heard in the air. It was another potent saber energy attack. Facing the oncoming blade energy, Zen swung the huge sword in his hand once again, chopping at the blade energy. After Zen broke the blade energy of the ogre warrior's saber for a second time, the ogre warrior laughed out loud. He sheathed his long saber next to his body and suddenly, taking a step forward, rushed straight towards Zen. Seeing the ogre warrior rushing towards him, Zen still appeared indifferent. His long sword circled in the air with a glittering arc and once again stabbed towards that ogre warrior. God's intimidating strike. Even the mark of the true god was truly invincible and would never be defeated by Zen. However, the corridor of the Emperor was after all only a test. All that Zen could do was to display his full strength. Zen believed that if he was unable to pass through this corridor of Emperor, then perhaps no any other warrior could pass through the illusion battlefield. Besides, when he had passed the first torch, that woman called Hannah did not fight against him. This was ultimately a test of his skills and comprehension related to the godly way. Clang! When the saber and sword clashed together, a crisp sound issued forth. Zen abruptly retreated several steps again, and he launched the sword strike with no sign of giving up. God's intimidating strike. The god's intimidating strike only had one sword technique, which was a simple but extremely powerful move. When abandoning all emotions, the warrior would be able to break 10,000 other moves with this one pure sword strike. In the past, Supreme Lord's sword had been able to contend with a true god with the strength of a Supreme Lord. The might of this sword strike was truly formidable and yielded victories that were unparalleled. Clang, clang, clang. As the sword and saber continuously collided, the surprise in the ogre warrior's eyes intensified. Ever since the opening of the corridor of Emperor, many arrogant young warriors had tried to defeat him and pass through the place which he guarded. Making those young warriors kneel down had never been a simple matter for the ogre warrior. Some warriors had possessed skills and talent, though they all submitted after one or two moves. However, no one had ever launched so many strikes while fighting against him. Moreover, he discovered that the sword intent that Zen wielded contained an aura that was not much weaker than the aura which his own saber emitted. In the eyes of this mark of the true god, this was a miraculous feat. After all, his saber contained an overbearing power, on which he had relied to follow the godly way. How could a mere Soul Sea Realm warrior offer such resistance with just one sword move? What kind of sword technique have you practiced? The ogre warrior coldly demanded. Don't you know it? Zen smiled slightly, and the long sword in his hand slashed out once again. If you want to learn this sword strike, I can teach you. Clang! The ogre warrior's saber and Zen's sword collided, releasing a shower of sparks. Great! You are even crazier and more confident than I was in the past. When he heard Zen's words, the ogre warrior howled with laughter, instead of getting angry, and a look of admiration appeared in his eyes. However, the giant sword in Zen's hand suddenly shattered upon the next collision. The giant sword that Zen had held was just a mediocre weapon, and it had instantly broken into pieces this time. When the ogre warrior impassively watched this scene, he took advantage of it and rushed forward. His goal was not to kill Zen, though. In the blink of an eye, he raised his long saber, and a sword shot towards Zen. I don't believe that you can break this move of mine. Take up your sword. As he finished speaking, the ogre warrior suddenly slashed his long saber up towards the sky. 1 slash, 2 slashes, 3 slashes. The thick dark clouds in the sky were all shredded by his saber energy. After these last few slashes, the ogre warrior coldly said, "The saber is the overlord, and what I have pursued throughout my life is the domineering momentum of an overlord. I have relied on my saber to reach the domineering godly way. And I have also acquired the unrivaled godly tile. My name is Reggie." After he had finished speaking, the thick clouds were sliced apart and separated. A ray of sunlight pierced through the clouds. At the same time, the invisible blade energy descended from the sky, and gathered all over Zen's body. Buzz, buzz, buzz. Zen, on the other hand, pointed his sword at the sky, remaining calm. The blade energy was extremely remarkable and potent as it fused with the heaven and earth. However, under this suppression, Zen remained unmoved. Emotion closing meant to sever all emotions and become nothing. Zen was actually in a moment of extreme humbleness, and he was insignificant in the face of the blade energy descending from the sky. However, he gave others the feeling that he looked down on all living creatures. Even the strongest pressure was ignored by Zen. Whoosh, 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 countless streaks of blade energy descended, surging chaotically around Zen. The blade energy gushed out like the turbulent current of a river, while Zen was like a boulder in the middle of the river, standing tall and unmoving. The gushing currents could not make Zen move even a bit, and they had to split upon him and separate in two directions. After a long time, the thick clouds in the sky started to gather together again. There was no more blade energy descending from the sky anymore. Zen stared at the true God called Reggie. He had finally withdrawn from the state of emotion closing, and his eyes looked a bit brighter. After Reggie noticed the change in Zen, he laughed loudly with a note of regret in his voice. "You're not suitable for my godly way. Furthermore, you already have your own godly way, but the godly way that you seek to cultivate is destined to be a waste of effort." "Why?" Zen asked in confusion, after hearing Reggie's condemning words. Chapter 1282, Illusion of Killing Sword Mountain. There was always a limit to the level of power that one could reach in the universe. For example, when one trained in the fire law, the highest level one could reach was the 10th level. However, Soul Sea Realm warriors could only cultivate up to the 5th level, Spirit Supreme Realm warriors up to the 6th level, Spirit Transformation Realm warriors up to the 7th level, World Lords up to the 8th level, and Supreme Lords up to the 9th level. This was the power of the limit. It was difficult to cross it. There were still some Supreme Lords who had taken on the heavenly destiny of the fire law. They could cultivate the fire law to the top level, the 10th level. Reaching this top stage meant that someone had reached perfection under this round of the heavens. But this wasn't the true uppermost level. There were levels even higher than the 10th level. But the 10th level was one that most creatures in the universe couldn't even understand, leave alone aim to touch. To reach higher levels, one had to transcend this round of the heavens and become a true god. And not everyone could become a true god. The lotus flower floating above the heads of many warriors directly hinted at the possibility of their crossing the heavens. Each warrior trained in a different godly way. There were the 5 elements godly way, the snow godly way, and so on. "If I'm not mistaken, you've trained in the emotion closing godly way," Reggie said, studying Zen closely. "Emotion closing, that's a kind of godly way?" Zen asked, mildly surprised. Zen had known a little about the essence of the emotion-closing godly way, which was why he had been able to launch such an effective God's intimidating strike. What he didn't know was that emotion-closing was also a godly way. He had thought this to be just another method that he had comprehended from the God's intimidating strike. Yes, the emotion-closing godly way is an extremely powerful godly way. But at the same time, it is also forbidden, Reggie said. He paused for a second before continuing. "If you really succeed in cultivating this way, it will incite the gods into a fury that will burn you. It is not advisable." Reggie looked fierce and powerful, a character who wasn't afraid of anyone in the universe. His craziness had given birth to the domineering aura he carried with him where he went and was why he had gained enlightenment and stepped into the domineering godly way. But he was visibly cautious when he mentioned the emotion-closing godly way. "Is that so?" Zen said, his eyes flickering. Zen's personality was completely different from Reggie's. He wasn't as arrogant as Reggie, but Zen's warrior spirit was way tougher and way more resilient than Reggie's. Zen would think about it carefully, now that a true god had advised him, but he knew that words couldn't change his original intention. Reggie could vaguely see what Zen was thinking. He laughed heartily and waved the large saber in his hand, saying, "That is all I want to say. You may go now." Boom. The lone city, the battlefield, and the ogre army that was lying prostrate on the ground, all suddenly vanished, and Zen returned again to the corridor of Emperor. In the flame dancing on the torch, Reggie's soul mark continued to ponder as he watched Zen's figure disappeared into the distance. This person has no destiny. How could it be that a warrior without destiny has trained in the emotion-closing godly way? It's not right. Without a destiny, he isn't a true person. His fate might have been hidden by someone using great theurgy. But what is their true purpose? Zen did not know that Reggie was still thinking about him after he left. He strolled along the long corridor and continued to study the murals on both sides. Some murals recorded Reggie's life. He was also one of the most unusual among the ogre warriors and had lived an extremely difficult life. He had been rejected by the ogres. Afterwards, he had returned to them while they were in danger and had saved their lives by himself. All of this was recorded in the murals. Zen's experience in the illusion was also related to one of the murals. Reggie had really used his strength to guard a lone city, and had fought tens of thousands of ogre warriors alone. He had guarded the city for 3 years. It is no coincidence that this man became a true god. Other people might have relied on luck, but this man's luck is poor. To be able to achieve such a feat is truly admirable. Zen sighed with emotion. Zen didn't reject all of the ogre warriors even though he hadn't encountered many good people among them. The people of this race, however, always had their own way of doing things. As he continued moving forward, another torch appeared in the corridor ahead. The third true god, the god of divine might. He had been born 6 grand eras earlier and had stepped into the godly way through the martial arts he himself had created. As one round of the heavens after another was destroyed and revived, history had forgotten even the true gods. The fourth true god, following the killing godly way, was born 3 grand eras ago and was a supreme warrior of the demon knight. The fifth true god, Zen walked further and further along the corridor of Emperor. He could feel the determination and characteristics of these true gods as they stepped into the godly way. Perhaps the goals and the personalities of these true gods are completely different. But they all have hearts that seek to push and even surpass limits. And it's only because of this perseverance that they were able to surpass the heavens. I won't give up. It was just as Reggie had predicted. The emotion-closing godly way was not Zen's best choice. But since he had walked this way, Zen was determined not to have any regrets. The sixth true god, the seventh true god. The further in he went, the more intense the aura of the corridor of Emperor became. True gods were divided into the strong and the weak. It was possible to deduce their true strength from their auras. The further the true god was placed, the more powerful he would be, and the more difficult this trial would be. But in the end, no godly way was suitable for Zen. The 8th, the 9th, the 10th, Zen's gaze was fixed on the flame in front of him. As the flame flickered and swayed swiftly, Zen felt a familiar feeling emerging from the soul within the flame. This flame, Zen murmured. And without thinking, Zen took another step forward. Boom! The flame exploded once again. Zen opened his eyes, looking surprised. A mountain full of numerous swords had appeared before him. The Killing Sword Mountain. Back when Zen had comprehended the consummate sword intent, he had entered the Killing Sword Mountain once. He never would have thought that he would be able to return to the Killing Sword Mountain again, let alone in this flame. No, this isn't the real Killing Sword Mountain. It is just an environment that the intellectual soul mark has created, Zen thought. Zen had observed the corridor of Emperor very carefully. The illusions created by the soul marks of these true gods were scenes in the universe that had left the deepest impressions on them. Reggie guarding the lone city and Hannah in the world of snow and ice were likely the most valuable memories for these true gods, and also the scenes that the universe couldn't forget. The Killing Sword Mountain. It had appeared during this grand era. As to the one who might have left an indelible mark on the Killing Sword Mountain. Supreme Lord Sword. The name occurred to Zen. Supreme Lord Sword had left behind a poem in the Orange Sea world, with which he had merged the pinnacle of his comprehension of the gods' intimidating strike. And it was said that this Supreme Lord was already missing. If he had died, his heavenly destiny would dissipate and turn into a new crown of destiny again. This obviously meant that the Supreme Lord Sword wasn't dead yet. Now that Zen could see the Killing Sword Mountain here, did it mean that Supreme Lord Sword had become a true god? Had he become a true god through the emotion-closing godly way? Of course, this was merely Zen's speculation. There were probably other figures in the Killing Sword Mountain who had managed to become true gods, and they might not be Supreme Lord Sword. Zen felt that this was the most likely possibility. Standing at the foot of the mountain, Zen looked up and spotted a faint figure standing at the peak of the Killing Sword Mountain. All right, Zen murmured, letting out a huff as if preparing himself. I will climb to the top and figure it out. Zen would try to pass this test regardless of whether or not this person was Supreme Lord Sword. Whoosh! As Zen advanced, a long sword rose from the ground and shot towards him. Only a mysterious weapon. Zen stretched out 2 fingers and held the tip of the sword in place. The mysterious weapon could not move. Then, with a light shake of Zen's wrist, the mysterious weapon lost its spirituality. He held the now ordinary long sword in his hand and walked slowly up the mountain. When Zen had first climbed up the Killing Sword Mountain, every step he had taken had been a shock. Now, it was as if he had stepped into a danger-free zone. The long swords rose from the ground and shot towards him, one after another. Zen merely had to wave his hand, like brushing away stray twigs, to keep them off him. But even though it was just an illusion and not the real Killing Sword Mountain, Zen was deeply moved, now that he had been forced to revisit it. Chapter 1283, Sword Chen. Before long, Zen had reached the mountainside. But his gaze was transfixed on something just beyond. Zen had met Lavender's long sword at this very spot. And yet it was nowhere to be seen. Zen ventured forward another few hundred feet. Back then, Zen had thrown his sword away, but no matter where he looked, he could not see any sign of it. It makes sense. This is an illusion made by the soul mark of a true god, not the true Killing Sword Mountain. This illusion may be the Killing Sword Mountain from 100,000 years, or a million, possibly even tens of millions years ago. It looks like it will be impossible to ever retrieve my sword again. Whoosh, 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 whoosh. Suddenly, those swords came raining down towards him. When Zen reached the middle of the mountain, the long swords that were attacking him were fairy weapons. Ding, 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 ding. Zen masterfully swung the mysterious weapon, deflecting each of the swords as he advanced. He continued up the mountain, eager to see who that person was. Weapons continued to fall on him. Fairy weapons, sacred weapons, divine weapons, rank above rank. The higher up the mountain he went, the higher the rank of the swords on the mountain was. Each sword was getting sharper and sharper, attacking him in different way. There were many different swordsmanship styles. The emotion closing godly way. Strictly speaking, it is also a type of swordsmanship. I wonder, if I train in other swordsmanship, will I be able to enter the godly way? The question lingered in Zen's mind. Just as the other true gods he had encountered before, the godly ways they stepped into were also varied. But could that mean that there was not any specific cultivation method for cultivating the godly ways? As long as there was some way that one could cultivate a technique to the peak beyond the restraints of the heavens, would one be able to create a new godly way? Could there be many ways considered godly? And yet why would the emotion-closing godly way be known as a forbidden way? As the thoughts ticked away in his mind, Zen continued up to the top of the mountain. At the summit, a middle-aged man with a long, wispy beard sat upright, a short sword floating gently beside him. The short sword was 2.5 feet long and white in color. The blade was simple and unadorned but undeniably sharp. It seemed unassuming. The god's intimidating sword. Zen's eyebrows rose slightly at the sight. He had long guessed that the person at the peak of the mountain would be Supreme Lord Sword. But now seeing the god's intimidating sword which Yolanda had mentioned before, Zen had been sure this person was Supreme Lord Sword. However, since Supreme Lord Sword had appeared in the corridor of Emperor, perhaps the more fitting name for him was True God Sword. Buzz, buzz, buzz. The god's intimidating sword suddenly rang out and circled in the air, shooting towards Zen. But Zen was prepared. This was not his first encounter with the white sword, for he had faced against it while at the giant rock in the Orange Sea world. As the sword flew towards him, Zen did not hesitate at all. He quickly moved the mysterious weapon in his hand, blocking it, but the god's intimidating sword did not budge. But the mysterious weapon was not strong enough to block the god's intimidating sword. Zen's sword was instantly shattered, falling to the ground in pieces. Zen remained composed, lifting his hand to conjure another long sword in its place. This was the first-rank divine weapon that he had just captured. Warriors would rarely find a supreme divine weapon on the Killing Sword Mountain. Warriors who already had their divine weapons rarely passed through this mountain to gain insights, so it was unlikely to find their weapons here. Ding, ding, ding. Zen brandished his new sword against the god's intimidating sword. Since Zen had summited the mountain, Supreme Lord Sword had not opened his eyes, disinterested with the goings-on. On the contrary, Zen had no interest in the Supreme Lords he encountered before, but he was extremely interested in this Supreme Lord Sword. The god's intimidating sword continued to fly at Zen, protecting its master intuitively. Whenever Zen tried to make it higher up the mountain, he was forced back by the god's intimidating sword. Each movement from the god's intimidating sword was calculated but unpredictable. The trajectory of the god's intimidating sword was extremely agile. Even though Zen used the no move, he could only block every move the god's intimidating sword made as Supreme Lord Sword sat silently, his eyes closed shut. Seeing this scene, Zen frowned. After he concentrated for a second, a sword intent that jumping continuously suddenly shot out. The god's intimidating strike. Zen usually only used this move in times of crisis. Even when he was fighting against Lucille, he did not use it. Yet, when against these true gods, Zen did not hold back and used every move with all his power to fight back. Ding! The blades connected, the sheer power finally knocking away the god's intimidating sword. Finally, Supreme Lord Sword opened his eyes. He could not hide the astonishment in his eyes. Zen pulled his hands together in a deep bow to Supreme Lord Sword. He carefully stepped forward. Before he could open his mouth to speak, Supreme Lord Sword jumped in. "What is your name?" "My name is Zen Luo, sir," Zen replied. "You know me?" Supreme Lord Sword asked. "Yes, you are Supreme Lord Sword," Zen replied. Supreme Lord Sword's eyes scanned over Zen from top to bottom. My name is Sword Chen. I created the emotion closing godly way. So, Supreme Lord, was just a title and Sword Chen was his real name. Becoming true God, it was now no longer appropriate for Zen to call him a Supreme Lord. It seems you have followed my way of swordsmanship here. Supreme Lord Sword's eyes were now glued to Zen. Yes, sir, Zen nodded. A whisper of a smile crawled onto Supreme Lord Sword's mouth. He remained seated at the summit of the mountain. He slowly reached out his hand and the god's intimidating sword came flying back. Then, he pointed his sword at Zen. A cyan light came shining out of the sword. This cyan light was also the sword intent. However, this sword intent was 1,000 times purer than the sword intent that Zen had comprehended before. This was the ultimate sword intent. Zen was not intimidated. He knew that Supreme Lord Sword did not intend to kill him, so he knew that this was just a test. Without hesitation, he thrust out his sword as well. The two of them moved as though they were mirrors. But Zen's incompetence to Supreme Lord Sword still showed. The two swords never collided. Supreme Lord Sword jabbed him, the sword going through halfway before he retracted, only to jab once more. Zen did not hesitate either. When Supreme Lord Sword retracted his sword, Zen did the same. When Supreme Lord Sword stabbed out, Zen did the same again. These two people clashed in midair, but no one won the fight. 1 sword strike, 10 sword strikes, 100 sword strikes, 1,000 sword strikes, 10,000 sword strikes, 100,000 strikes. Time meant nothing to them at this moment. Zen did not know what fatigue was, and Supreme Lord Sword was also quite patient. This was a test, a tempering, and a silent teaching. After 1,000,000 sword strikes, Supreme Lord Sword suddenly stopped as he looked indifferently at Zen, saying, "If I didn't see it with my own eyes, I would never believe that someone would be able to see through the poem I left behind." "I knew that was a coincidence," Zen replied. "No," Supreme Lord Sword smiled slightly. "Not exactly. The fortune before you is not set in stone. It seems there is someone pushing you in a different direction." Confusion befell Zen's face. He did not understand what he was hearing. Someone pushing me. Who he is, I do not know. And I do not know his intentions, but I am sure that he is making the arrangements for you, Supreme Lord Sword continued. Zen's brows creased. He did not understand what Supreme Lord Sword was talking about and the mystery made him feel uneasy. Zen was no fatalist. Even if he came to a situation that seemed inevitable, he always seemed to find a way to exert his will. His fate always remained in his own hands, even if for a little bit. But the words of Supreme Lord Sword undermined all of this. Was there really someone who was planning out his fate? Seeing the confusion on Zen's face, Supreme Lord Sword smiled faintly. "This is not a problem you and I have to discuss. I am not particularly concerned about this." As though he was closing the chapter on what he just revealed, he switched topics. "How many lotus petals has your lotus flower bloomed?" Supreme Lord Sword asked. 9 petals of the Hinayana lotus flower and 26 petals of the Mahayana lotus flower, Zen offered up easily. Supreme Lord Sword nodded his head, as though in approval of Zen's answer. "Not bad. With the 35 petals at the Soul Sea realm, it will not be long before you become a godly genius." Not bad at all. He knew that Zen had indeed succeeded in the emotion-closing godly way, and with only 1 lotus petal remaining closed, Zen's lotus flower would soon be in full bloom. Chapter 1284, The Dipamkara Buddha. Sword Chen didn't have much interest in the martial artists that passed through the corridor of Emperor. He had entered the godly way through emotion closing. He also knew that he had entered a path that was forbidden, and he had long since given up the idea of passing on the technique to anyone. Therefore, even though there were quite a few martial artists who passed by his torch, he had never taken any of them seriously. There had been a few swordsmen that were extremely talented. With their great determination, they hadn't flinched the slightest at any of the challenges from the rain of swords that had fallen, and they had climbed all the way up to the mountain. But in the end, they had all been chased away by Sword Chen with his god's intimidating sword. However, now, Sword Chen had met a guy who had comprehended the god's intimidating strike. Moreover, his level of comprehension of this technique was quite impressive. He had comprehended 99% of it. With 1% more of comprehension, he would reach consummation of the god's intimidating strike. Furthermore, this guy had not only comprehended the god's intimidating strike but had also opened 35 petals in his lotus flower. He would achieve consummation with just 1 more lotus petal. In the eyes of Sword Chen, Zen was like a perfect jade with a missing corner. And that missing corner was in his hand. All he needed to was to reach out and gently put the missing corner back. Then, he would be flawless. As he received Sword Chen's praise, Zen stood rooted to the spot without saying anything. After sizing Zen up from head to toe, Sword Chen asked, "Have you ever had a master?" "Yes," Zen answered honestly. A hint of disappointment flashed through Sword Chen's eyes when he heard this answer. However, he smiled faintly. He could be considered half a master to Zen as he had taught him the god's intimidating strike. "Do you know that the emotion-closing godly way is a forbidden way?" Sword Chen continued to ask. Zen nodded. "Yes, I got to know it a while ago." "Then, do you know why the emotion-closing godly way is a forbidden way?" Sword Chen asked again. "I don't know." Zen was, after all, only at the Soul Sea realm. His current knowledge about the cultivation levels was limited to the Spirit Supreme realm and those below it. He knew that a warrior who reached the Spirit Supreme realm could create beings within their consciousness. As for the differences among Spirit Transformation realm, the World Lord, and the Supreme Lord, he knew nothing. Then there were the various godly ways, of which he only knew the names. When it came to what they really meant, he was like a naive child facing the ways of the complicated world, he didn't understand them at all. "It's fine that you don't know." Sword Chen did not intend to explain it to Zen. He only said, "Your god's intimidating strike is close to perfection, but it still lacks one thing. Do you know what that is?" Upon hearing these words, Zen's expression became extremely serious. 6 years ago, Zen had already practiced the god's intimidating strike and reached 99% of its technique. But when he had slashed with his sword using the god's intimidating strike, he had had the feeling that something was missing and he'd been unable to perform it perfectly. In the past 6 years, apart from cultivating the 8 smoky melodies, thunderbolt annihilation, and enemy-repelling arts, he had also been constantly comprehending the god's intimidating strike. However, Zen had been stuck in a predicament regarding this swordsmanship technique for 6 years and had not made the slightest bit of progress since then. Lavender had once tried to help him think of ways to solve this, and the Cyan Dragon had also come up with a few ideas, but to no avail. Zen, with all his talent, hadn't been able to completely comprehend the god's intimidating strike even after spending 6 years trying to master it. He had considered all the possible ways and tried all the methods he could think of, but he'd made no progress. The Cyan Dragon had then told Zen that the last 1% of the god's intimidating strike perhaps didn't lie within Zen. Since he could not comprehend the last bit on his own, he might have to look for external help. "Sir, please help me," Zen said seriously. Sword Chen replied, "If you want to know the answer, then you should go to the Sword Manor. There, you will find the answer." The Sword Manor was not a grade 10 sacred place. It had initially been formed by a group of independent sword cultivators. After countless years of development, the Sword Manor had gradually evolved into a strong force that specialized in swordsmanship. However, the person who had made the Sword Manor a significant place in the universe was none other than Sword Chen. The Sword Manor had long since become a sacred place for all the swordsmen in the universe. The Killing Sword Mountain was in the Sword Manor. The Sword Manor. Zen repeated these words and kept them in mind. At this moment, Sword Chen waved his hand and the god's intimidating sword flew toward Zen, coming to a sudden halt just before it could hit him. A cyan light appeared on the tip of the sword and danced around Zen's arm. After a moment, the cyan light formed a sword-shaped pattern on the surface of his arm and flickered for a while before disappearing into his arm. "This is all I can do for you." Sword Chen sighed. There was a complicated expression in his eyes. "You can go now." Boom. As Sword Chen waved his hand, the illusion of the Killing Sword Mountain dissipated and turned into a flame that condensed on the torch. The look in Sword Chen's eyes. At the last moment, Zen noticed the strange expression in Sword Chen's eyes. Had he encountered any trouble after becoming a true god? No matter what trouble it was, with Zen's current strength, it was impossible for him to interfere and be of any help to Sword Chen. There was no point worrying about it. Since Sword Chen had told him that the missing piece he needed to fully comprehend the god's intimidating strike was hidden within the Sword Manor, he would probably have to pay a visit to the Sword Manor after this illusion battlefield ended. This time, in his journey across the corridor of Emperor, what Zen had obtained was more than just this piece of news. After sparring with Sword Chen for about 1,000,000 strikes, he had greatly honed his sword intent. He had gained a lot, but he did not know if there would be any rewards after he passed the 5th Hall of Causality. The last Hall of Causality was different from the former ones. There wasn't much danger in the corridor of Emperor. The only thing that might be a burden was the pressure of numerous true gods' soul marks. However, martial artists could feel the godly way in the pressure, and from a certain point of view, this was the best reward. As Zen thought about this, he walked forward. While he advanced, he carefully paid attention to the murals on both sides of the corridor of Emperor. These murals depicted how Sword Chen had tempered his will as he dedicated his life to cultivating swordsmanship before joining the Sword Manor. They also depicted how he had become the master of the Killing Sword Mountain and how he had fought in the Orange Sea world back then. The soul within the lamp once again let out a soft sigh. Among the 3,000 godly ways, only one of them was a forbidden way, and that was the emotion-closing godly way. In the past, when Sword Chen cultivated the emotion-closing godly way, he had obtained great benefits that had made his strength far exceed the strength of any ordinary true god. Even when he was a supreme lord, he had possessed the strength to harm a true god. However, that couldn't change the fact that the journey he had embarked on was a forbidden way. The emotion-closing godly way was something forbidden to begin with. Now, although Sword Chen had understood the consequences, he had no choice but to hide somewhere as he was being hunted down by a mighty god. Looking at Zen's receding figure, Sword Chen was also very puzzled. The person behind this boy had paid a huge price to cover his fate, but why had he made him cultivate the emotion-closing godly way? What was that person trying to do? As Zen continued on his way forward, he did not meet any more torches on the wall. Is it that each warrior can only encounter 10 torches in this corridor of Emperor, namely the 10 true gods' soul marks? Or could it be that, in this universe, there have only been 10 true gods throughout the countless grand eras? Thinking about this, Zen quickly shook his head. True gods were indeed rare, but the number of them could not be so low. After traveling for a while, Zen saw the exit of the corridor of Emperor. When he walked out the exit, he discovered that the 6 separate corridors of Emperor converged at the end. Where he stood now was in a circular hall, and there were already other martial artists waiting here. Janet, Haley, it turned out that the 2 female warriors of their group had already passed through the corridor of Emperor and come out. Zen, we're so glad that you've come out. Janet smiled sweetly at Zen. The 3 of them looked at one another, only to discover that there was a slight change in all 3 of them. This change was inevitable after they got some insight on the godly way. Even if a martial artist hadn't found the godly way that suited them, as long as they had passed by the soul flames, they could feel the aura of those true gods. Perhaps the aura didn't mean to test one's soul, but it was still beneficial for martial artists. It was quite easy to pass the 5th hall of causality, Haley said flatly. Which true gods did you meet? I met the legendary Master Shiloh. Janet smiled with a hint of excitement in her eyes. Zen nodded his head slightly and casually named a few of the true gods he had met. This was not a secret that could not be revealed. However, Zen didn't mention meeting Sword Chen. As they talked, a human figure flashed in the corridor of Emperor. They all turned around and saw Jeffrey walking out of it. Jeffrey put his hands together, slightly closing his eyes while mumbling something, as if he was a monk who had made great achievements. When he completely walked out of the corridor of Emperor, he smiled at Zen and the others and said, I've received advice from the past Buddha. There was no such concept as godly way in the blessed Buddha land. What they called Buddhism was the same thing as godly way. And the past Buddha was the Dipamkara Buddha. Chapter 1285. The illusion became real. Jeffrey was undoubtedly lucky to have obtained the Dipamkara Buddha's guidance. He had once failed in becoming a fully fledged ace talent before. But this time, he had the Dipamkara Buddha to help him comprehend the secrets of cultivating an indestructible body. The numerous arhats Zen fought in the ancient temple all ended up recovering after being destroyed because they were able to rely on the past Solemn Kalpa's power. That was exactly what Jeffrey comprehended. The things they found in the corridor of Emperor were all extremely rare and valuable, which made them extremely happy. True God's soul marks were in those torches. It was extremely rare for anybody in this universe to be able to find a true God. But the soul marks were already good enough and made it seem as if it was the true God himself that guided them on their way. Minutes after Jeffrey came out, someone laughed heartily in the corridor. Ha ha, have you all passed? Coleman asked, also walking out from the corridor with a big, happy smile on his face. He had to hunch a bit since his big, muscular body had to fit through the 10-feet-high corridor. I didn't think it would be so easy to pass through the 5th hall. The torches, illusions were frightening but were actually useless, he said with a smug look on his face. His words surprised everyone present. The 5th hall of causality was not a test. Because they would all pass no matter what they did. In the process of exploring the corridor, all of them had to rely on their own means to try to understand the auras that emanated from the true gods. This 5th hall was, in fact, a great training opportunity. How did you pass through? Janet asked Coleman. The ogre shrugged. When I got sucked into the illusion, I just kept on running. When I ran, I managed to get rid of the flames. There were some times when I thought I was going to die, but I always managed to leave the illusion just in time." Zen, Jeffrey, Haley, and Janet were rendered speechless. The true God's soul marks would have also been astonished if they heard what he just said. Jeffrey patiently explained the value of the corridor to Coleman. The ogre was stunned in silence for a bit, probably processing what he had just been told, before letting out a huge scream and running back to the corridor. Unfortunately, no matter how hard he tried, there was no way he could re-enter. The corridor of Emperor was only a one-way path and going back was no longer an option. Ansel got out not long after. He did not intentionally restrain his aura, but it was noticeably fainter. It seemed he also obtained some benefits from the corridor. Once everyone gathered in the circular hall, they set off again and continued their journey. Everyone was naturally in a good mood, except for Coleman, of course. Beyond the exit was a circular hall where they found a round plate that shimmered with a faint, golden light. Around the plate were 6 mysterious, pink dots of light that hovered in the air. Ding! There was a tinkling sound as the 6 dots flew towards them and floated just above their heads. At that moment, a thought was poured inside each warrior's mind. Everyone took the time to absorb this thought and digest it. After understanding the meaning behind it, all of them opened their eyes with a trace of ecstasy evident on their faces. This even has the ability to make the illusion become real. This is the real reward. Jeffrey marveled in surprise. Janet's face was also practically glowing in glee. The first time she entered the Hall of Causality, she was defeated and was directly sent back to the main city. There was no doubt that she was terribly depressed by that loss since she gambled away 5 million illusion points to enter. However, she did not give up and saved up more illusion points to enter it a second time. She didn't have that many illusion points and she could only hope that her persistence and hard work would be enough to carry her all the way to the end. Fortunately, it seemed as if her efforts were now paying off. Coleman, on the other hand, was currently giggling to himself. Zen stared up at the pink dot with an astonished look on his face. This dot was an opportunity for them to bring out an item from the illusion battlefield. Those within the illusion battlefield were only mere projections of their true selves. The person that existed within this space was only a copy or a duplicate of the real warrior. There existed a duplicate for each warrior in this world. Lucille, someone who had one soul in 2 bodies, essentially owned 3 duplicates of herself. It wasn't just their physical bodies. Their life vitality crystals, space rings, and other treasures would also be cloned. Jeffrey's Buddha curse blade would be copied with the original in the outside and a duplicate inside the illusion battlefield. The same could be said for Zen's Thunder Wind Divine Sword and Black Star. Once they left, their projections would disappear. The only thing they would end up with was the experience they gained there. However, the pink dots let them take out one of their belongings. Zen, for instance, would be able to bring out the Thunder Wind Divine Sword out of the illusion battlefield. Jeffrey would also be able to take out the Buddha curse blade. It was essentially a chance for everyone to copy a treasure. Zen was in no hurry to copy his weapon. A first-rank divine weapon was powerful, but one Thunderwind Divine Sword was already enough for him. He had Livingston to forge him other unrivaled magical weapons anyway, so it wasn't really a big deal for him. However, Jeffrey's Buddha curse blade was different. His status in the entire blessed Buddha land wasn't low, and in fact, it was only second to the ace talents. However, he still lacked the qualifications to own a supreme divine weapon. It was true that the clans all handed out their powerful treasures to the juniors in order to help them get a good ranking. But they would all have to return these splendid weapons after coming back from the illusion battlefield. But this pink dot changed everything. With it, he could then bring out the Buddha curse blade and duplicate it. Jeffrey could hand over one but keep the other copy for himself. It was something that really made him overflow with joy. He took out the Buddha curse blade with no hesitation. Whoosh! There was a crisp, clean sound as the Buddha curse blade was unsheathed. Jeffrey then reached up to grab the pink dot in his hand and squeezed it. Buzz, buzz, buzz. The dot easily shattered into specks of dust that floated towards the Buddha curse blade. As it scattered over the weapon, a small mark began to appear on its surface. This mark was extremely special, in that all items bearing it could be brought out of the illusion battlefield. Zen, on the other hand, was still thinking about what item he wanted to copy. He already had quite a few treasures. And he wasn't really in any hurry to duplicate any of them. It didn't help that his greatest weapon was, in fact, himself, and there was no way he could duplicate himself. The pink dot had made it clear to him that he could only take out an item and not a person. Item, he pondered to himself for a moment. He probably spent a few seconds thinking before his eyes lit up. I'm so stupid, why must I only consider the items I've brought in? There's no need to duplicate any of them, he thought. There was no point duplicating the Thunderwind Divine Sword or the Black Star. One was already enough for him. However, Zen had a treasure that belonged to the illusion battlefield but would be extremely useful outside, the teleportation token. If he had that, then he could basically travel anywhere he wanted in the entire universe instantly. He had been trapped in the fairy palace for 6 years, which was a really huge problem. However, if he had the teleportation token, then not even a Supreme Lord would be able to restrain him. The only thing he was having reservations with was the fact that the token only seemed to record the main cities of a supreme world within the illusion battlefield. He wasn't really sure if it could be used outside it. I have no idea if this will work. This teleportation token is a special tool here in the illusion battlefield after all. He thought to himself, but he still took the token out. He then reached up and crushed the pink dot. It was the same process as the dot shattered into numerous specks of dust and then floated towards his chosen item. Chapter 1286, Choice. It seemed to rain a cloud of dusty mist as the fine powder danced continuously in the air, and then gathered in the teleportation token. Is it successful? Zen asked excitedly. His heart pounded so ecstatically that he almost wanted to jump up and down. He thought before that everything would disappear and he wouldn't be able to get any items after the illusion battlefield was closed. Now, he could even take the teleportation token with him. This was better than he expected. How could he not be excited? A mark the size of an ant appeared on the corner of the teleportation token not long after. It looked like it was indeed possible for him to take the teleportation token out of battlefield. However, he still did not know if he could travel to other places by using the teleportation token. If it turned out that he couldn't use the teleportation token if he took it out, then it meant that Zen would have wasted a perfect opportunity just because of it. This was like a gamble, but Zen was willing to take the risk. After all, if the teleportation token proved to be useful, he would be able to freely travel around the whole universe by then. Huh, what is this? Asked Coleman. He leaned towards Zen, his curious eyes fixated on the small teleportation token in Zen's hand. Whoosh! Zen quickly stuffed the teleportation token into his space ring and said, nothing. Coleman just stared at him with wide eyes. So mysterious, he muttered in disappointment. Zen shrugged indifferently and simply ignored him. Among their group of warriors, Zen was surprisingly not the one who found it the hardest to make a choice. The one who felt the most conflicted at that moment was none other than Janet. Her body concealed a piece of lofty wood. She could consider the lofty wood her life's treasure. Moreover, it was actually a living creature which had integrated with her. Thus, Janet should naturally not hesitate to choose the lofty wood. However, her arms were cradling the flame kitten. A trace of doubt appeared on her face. She rocked the little flame kitten a bit, and thought that she actually wanted to bring it out of the illusion battlefield. The truth was that the flame kitten was also a high-level law creature. It was extremely rare to find even in the divine flame world. Plus, it wasn't easy to catch a flame kitten. On the other hand, her lofty wood was a legendary divine wood that was considered to be a product beyond the heavens. She now had the chance to duplicate and take it out, but she suddenly hesitated. Janet, why are you hesitating? Zen asked. He looked at her in confusion after he had put away his teleportation token. Janet pursed her lips. I'm thinking which thing I should take out. Ha ha, why do you still think about it? You should choose the lofty wood. Jeffrey chimed in. Although Janet had used the lofty wood as an adjustable fishing rod in the Hall of Causality, everyone could clearly see the powerful life force contained within it. If she chose the lofty wood, who knew what powerful abilities Janet could possibly employ? In Zen's opinion, Janet really didn't need to think twice. But, I want to take this kitten away, Janet said, her eyes blinking. You are so crazy, Jeffrey shouted in protest. Nearby, Haley glanced at Janet indifferently. However, she just smiled and said nothing. Whatever Janet decided to take away had nothing to do with the other warriors. They were all members of the same team when they were in the Hall of Causality, but competitors when they'd gotten out. This flame kitten might be very rare, but it was definitely not a supreme treasure. The price for taming a similar flame kitten was probably equal to getting a first-rank divine weapon. The flame kitten was hardly comparable with the piece of lofty wood. Janet was torn between the two in the beginning. However, she looked determined now as she crushed the pink light dot in her hand. She didn't take out the lofty wood. The powder flew towards the flame kitten and left behind a mark on its thick fur. Meanwhile, Jeffrey and the others just watched dumbfoundedly with wide eyes. The pink light dot was of course very valuable, but Janet wasted it on a kitten just like that. The others didn't say anything about it, but just felt it was really a pity. Yet, Janet looked resolute and she did not feel any regrets at all. Instead, she happily played with the flame kitten in her arms. Meow. Perhaps the flame kitten also knew something as it looked earnestly at Janet and purred gently. Soon enough, everyone took their chances and chose an item to bring out. At the same time, 6 exits appeared on the wall, the exits to the Hall of Causality. After we leave the Hall of Causality, will we return to the main city where we stayed before? Jeffrey asked. Janet looked at him and shook her head. She said, no, all of the exits of the Hall of Causality are fixed to a certain main city in the Supreme World. All the warriors who enter the Hall of Causality will eventually gather in the same main city. So, that main city. Jeffrey frowned slightly. Janet nodded and added, this is the illusion battlefield's true purpose. All the warriors who can enter the Hall of Causality are basically the best warriors in the Supreme World. Since the exits are set in one place, the top warriors would fight each other after leaving the Hall of Causality. Jeffrey's eyebrows cocked up at Janet's words. Everyone had a fighting intent in their eyes as well. Even Coleman, the weakest one among them, was absolutely the most powerful warrior of the main city where he stayed. And those who they wanted to challenge were on the same level as them. Then, let's go out, Haley suggested. Just then, Janet tilted her head and cheerfully said, Zen, I have a request. Don't attack any of us after leaving the hall. That's a good idea, I agree, Coleman immediately agreed. All of them had admired Zen in their team efforts in the Hall of Causality. After they'd observed him for quite a while, they all wondered what would happen if they became Zen's opponents. They believed that it wouldn't end well for them. They thought that they would all realize that they would never win against Zen, no matter how hard they tried. Jeffrey, Haley, Janet and the others were all afraid of Zen. Therefore, Janet made her request before she left the hall. As for Zen, he smiled faintly and nodded. Even Jeffrey, who thought highly of himself, stayed quiet. He only admired very few warriors, and Zen was the only one he regarded highly among all the warriors in the same realm. After that, they all walked towards the 6 beams of light. 6 rays of light suddenly appeared in the center of a main city within the central zone of the Supreme World. Those rays of light had gradually formed into 6 doors of light. They are coming out. Another team has passed through the Hall of Causality. This team doesn't seem to be that good. Only 6 of them survived. They're only average, and even their strongest warrior might not be an ace talent. Many warriors who were watching in the center of the main city chattered among themselves. These warriors were quite mediocre in strength. They weren't qualified to receive iron tickets or even more 5 million illusion points. They were unlucky to have been put in this main city where there were many invincible warriors. After all, the exit to the Hall of Causality was set in this city. Those who could enter the Hall of Causality were considered the best of all the main cities, which meant that those who passed the test in the Hall of Causality were extremely remarkable. They were either ace talents or second only to the ace talents. Thus, it was safe to say that the ordinary warriors in this main city were destined to be nobodies. When the first group of warriors that passed through the Hall of Causality emerged, they had carried out a slaughter in the main city. Those who were strong enough had fled away, and those who stayed were the weaker ones. They refused to leave the main city and simply remained there to watch the powerful warriors come out of the Hall of Causality. Some of the strong warriors didn't care about the weaker ones. They all quickly headed for other main cities or set out to explore more hidden places. However, there were still quite a few experts who chose to stay behind. Since the exit to the Hall of Causality was located in that main city, they believed that it was where they would encounter other experts. It could be said that one's ability to steal others' illusion points depended on their own skills and strengths. After Zen stepped out of the door of light, he glanced around and asked, Jeffrey, Janet, what are your plans? Jeffrey's eyes flashed slightly. I still have some things to digest. I need to find a quiet place to meditate and comprehend. The past Solemn Kalpa was a Buddhist scripture, but it was also a type of cultivation method. This past Solemn Kalpa was different from many other divine techniques, as it was a common Buddhist scripture in the blessed Buddha land. It was known that only a few warriors could truly comprehend it. It was similar to the god's intimidating strike. Countless warriors had spent even more than 10,000 years to comprehend it, but only Zen had truly mastered it. Chapter 1287, The Unexpected Meeting. After being enlightened by the Dipamkara Buddha, Jeffrey had only one thing in his mind right now, to find a place where he could put his newly discovered wisdom and knowledge into practice. It had become his top priority, even more important than obtaining illusion points. I guess it's also time for me to leave. I'll see you around, Haley bid the others goodbye. Judging by the tone of her voice, she had no plans of staying in the main city anymore and she was ready to leave any moment with no intention to look back. With all the words said, they all knew that it was the end of this so-called team. Short-lived as it might be, but they were all grateful for whatever friendship they had made. Indeed, all good things must come to an end. While everyone was saying their goodbyes, Janet just stood there, silently petting the little flame kitten in her arms. When she noticed the sudden silence around her, she looked up and saw everyone looking at her. She then turned to Zen and saw the look on the latter's face as if asking her about her plans. She tilted her head, smiled, and said to him, "I'll just follow you around." "Why would you do that?" Zen asked. Zen was no master of concealing his feelings. It was obvious just by looking at his face that he was baffled by Janet's plan. "Nothing fancy. I just want to watch how you will defeat other warriors, that's all." Janet replied with a sweeter smile. Although he was used to being alone, Zen also wouldn't mind some company. He figured that the illusion battlefield would soon change significantly, so before that happened, he would keep on challenging other warriors. So instead of arguing with Janet about her decision, he would just let her tag along. Besides, he intended to save all his energy for his endgame. Despite having a very high ranking, it wasn't good enough for Zen. His final goal was to complete the illusion battlefield. Looking back, Zen had already obtained interesting rewards in the Hall of Causality. So, he figured that the final event would be bigger and would mean more marvelous rewards. Of course, he didn't know for sure. But since he was already here, there was no harm in completing the illusion battlefield. Meanwhile, several warriors could be seen from a distance. They were casually walking towards the direction of Zen's group. Each was from a different race, and the one leading them was a male member of the Demon Knight race, which was quite an unusual sight to see. As the group of warriors finally approached them, their leader said in a frivolous voice, "Hey, look who we have here. What a coincidence. I didn't expect to see you here, Haley." The man who greeted Haley stood out among his companions with his undeniably rare features: green curly hair, a dark red mole on his forehead, and most especially his pair of narrow demonic eyes. Haley was about to leave when she suddenly heard the man's voice. Her body trembled as she slowly turned around to see him, and her face darkened at the same time. From the look on Haley's face, Janet, Jeffrey, and the others already knew this man was no friend and had ill intentions towards Haley. Malachi," Haley said. Her voice trembled and she couldn't almost speak. Of all people, Haley didn't expect to meet Malachi. To think that the illusion battlefield was so massive that the chances of them bumping to each other was little. Fate must have brought them here. Haley's performance in the Hall of Causality was quite exemplary. Although she rarely spoke to others, she had impressed them all with her calmness and alertness. But it seemed that the Haley they knew suddenly disappeared. It was surprising to see Haley so anxious and restless in front of this Demon Knight male. Her face looked like she had seen her worst nightmare. While the others were stunned, Zen remained calm and composed. He quietly stood on the side, rubbing his nose as he observed everyone's action and anticipated the turn of events. Malachi nonchalantly strode towards Haley. He examined her with his malicious eyes, licking his upper lip like a mad dog. Then, to everyone's surprise, he reached out his hand to her chest. Demon Knight females were naturally attractive and had a alluring figure. And so, with Haley's tight and fitted leather armor, these features were highlighted even more. Everyone could not believe what Malachi was doing to Haley. He was casually teasing her bosom with his hands like a child playing with a toy. Haley was disgusted with what Malachi was doing to her, but she couldn't resist. Her fear overpowered her disgust. "I can't believe it. It's been months since I last saw you. But those breasts haven't grown. You disappointed me. You know that, don't you?" Malachi said as he shook his head. He lifted Haley's chin and saw the killing intent glimmering in her eyes, but he didn't even bother. He continued, "Now, what's with that look, my sweet Haley? I thought you loved it when I play with your body like this. Don't you remember the feeling of us enjoying in each other's arms? You don't need to pretend in front of your friends, do you?" "Jerk," Haley shouted. She finally had gathered the courage to resist Malachi's harassment. Zen and the others knew the introverted and short-spoken Haley. Although they had fought side by side with her in the Hall of Causality, they had little knowledge of where she came from. They didn't even bother asking because they respected her decision to keep that side of her to herself. But today, they had finally discovered something about her background. They figured that Malachi had something on her, otherwise, she wouldn't have tolerated his outrageous behavior. But that part was still unknown to them. Would they ever find out? No one knew for sure. Zen wasn't interested in knowing such things. He already considered Haley as a friend because she was once there to cooperate and help him. Now, in her time of need, it was only fitting that he returned the favor. He was about to move when suddenly, to his surprise, Jeffrey and Janet moved to Haley's side. Even Coleman and Ansel, who were the timidest among the group, came to Haley's rescue. Malachi noticed the warriors that formed behind Haley. He indifferently swept his gaze over each one. His disdainful eyes looked at them as if he could see through their souls. He looked at Haley once again, locked his eyes with hers trying to intimidate, then his eyes moved to her chest once more. So, he continued as he glanced sideways to Haley. They're your companions who passed through the Hall of Causality with you, aren't they? Before Haley could answer, she felt a hand touched her left shoulder. When she turned to look, she saw the expressionless Zen staring at Malachi. Then, Zen looked at her and motioned her to move back before he stepped forward to confront the disrespectful man. He answered Malachi's question, yes. Do you have a problem with that? I see. So, what does this mean? Are you all going to help her? Malachi's eyes widened, and he didn't try to hide the contempt on his face as if taunting Zen. Not all. Just me, Zen said coldly. And it's not because of her. I just personally don't like you. You're too talkative and annoying. I figured I need to shut you up. Zen's expression didn't change. He looked and sounded calm, but one could feel his arrogance through his words. He wasn't naturally arrogant, but he would never let anyone speak to his comrade that way. He thought of giving this person a taste of his bitter pill. Malachi was left dumbfounded by Zen's words. He had never met anyone who would speak up to him like that. Moreover, he didn't expect that any of Haley's companions would have the courage to do that after what they had seen. Either Zen was stupid or showy for doing so. Shut me up, do you hear yourself? You're a funny guy, Malachi said and then burst into wild laughter. The warriors in Malachi's group also found it funny. They laughed like maniacs who escaped the asylum. Malachi's group was a mix of different races, the human race, demon knight race, and the knight group. Like Zen's group, they had also formed a temporary team with Malachi in the Hall of Causality. It was a quite common practice, and the team with the best warriors would usually outdo others. The main city was the exit to the Hall of Causality where fiercest battles between warriors were expected to happen, and where the transferring of large number of illusion points would normally follow. A warrior who got killed would lose his illusion points and they would be transferred to the warriors who killed them. In other cities, there were usually only one or two who had already obtained several million illusion points. Hence, the warriors would normally only obtain illusion points ranging from hundreds to several hundreds of thousands. But in this main city, warriors could easily obtain tens of millions of illusion points just by defeating one opponent. Because of this, the warriors with a large number of illusion points would tend to be vigilant as they passed through the Hall of Causality. Some warriors would stay with their companions who had fought side by side with them, while some would choose to hide within the city refusing to leave in the fear of losing their illusion points. In the Hall of Causality, the warriors had the opportunity to familiarize themselves with one another by cooperating to complete a task. After this, some warriors would agree to stay together as a group in preparation for the main city. Currently, there were already 3 teams that had almost dominated the entire main city. They were composed of the best warriors that had entered the city and other warriors had no chance against them. These teams would stay near the Hall of Causality to wait for their favorite target, those who just passed through the Hall of Causality. The warriors who could pass through the Hall of Causality were quite strong, and the number of illusion points they obtained far exceeded those of ordinary warriors. Malachi's team was one of these 3 teams. They had guarded the west gate of the main city and had plundered countless illusion points from other warriors. They were invincible that even an ace talent had been defeated by them. As Malachi's group continued to mock Zen's words with their laughter, Coleman could not help himself and laughed with them. Ogres naturally had loud voices, especially when they laughed helplessly. His laughter was so loud that it instantly overwhelmed Malachi's and his companions. When Malachi heard this, he abruptly stopped laughing and furrowed his eyebrows in dismay. He stared at Coleman and asked, "What's funny, ogre?" "Nothing. Your laugh is just contagious, that's all," Coleman said, trying hard to stop himself from laughing but to no avail. Zen saw the look on Malachi's face and a faint smile appeared on his face. Somehow, he enjoyed seeing Malachi being caught off guard by Coleman's sudden laugh. Malachi sneered as he turned to Haley and ordered, "I wouldn't want your friends to see me kill you. So, meet me outside the city. I'll give you a decent death and I'll get all the illusion points that you have obtained." After that, he turned back to Zen and asked, "Do you think you have what it takes to fight me? If you want to see death, dare to go outside the city so I can kill you." Don't worry, I will take my time on you. I don't think there's an ace talent in this group, one of his companions snorted. Ha ha, that's right, they will not stand a chance. These are a bunch of weak and coward warriors. Malachi, don't set your expectations too high. I bet they won't even step outside the city. They will spend every waking day in hiding. I know cowards when I see one. Malachi's group laughed once more as they gave their share of mockery towards Zen's group. Janet and Jeffrey had enough of the other group's boasting and shallow mockery. Cold killing intent started to show in their eyes. Jeffrey took a step forward and was about to say when Haley stopped him. Don't bother yourselves, please. I can deal with him by myself, and you should leave me alone. Malachi is an ace talent from our race. His strength is unfathomable, and he's the son of Supreme Lord Gunter, Haley said in a low voice. She pursed her lips and forced a smile to console them. Although she wasn't open to them, she considered them as her friends and didn't want to involve them in her troubles. Chapter 1288. The Saint Spear Sect. There were a total of 6 sects in the Demon Knight. These 6 sects were the most ancient groups of the Demon Knight. It was also these groups that controlled the ancient Demon Knight bloodline. Thus, the 3 queens of the Demon Knight always emerged from these 6 large sects. Back then, with Alina's help, Gunter had become the 4th Supreme Lord of the Demon Knight. Naturally, his sect had also become very powerful and influential. Even the Demon Knight, which had 3 queens as its leaders, had internal struggles. These 6 sects were under the control of the Board of Elders, which answered to the 3 queens. Thus, they were able to maintain the balance within the Demon Knight. However, ever since Lavender's disappearance, the balance that had been maintained before had been broken. The 2 sects that answered to the Queen of Life maintained their silence, just like the Queen of Life was indifferent to Alina's domineering behavior. As for the 2 sects that fell under the domain of the Queen of Killings, one sect sided with Elena while the other sect supported Lavender. Thus, the latter sect was immediately persecuted by Elena. This sect possessed the Saint Spear of the Demon Knight. All the previous generations of the Queen of Killings had used the Saint Spear from this sect, so this sect was also known as the Saint Spear sect. But now, the Saint Spear sect was in a terrible situation in the Demon Knight. Many of the sect members chose to hide, but some were forcibly enslaved by other sects. The men of the sect were treated as slaves while the beautiful women were treated as playthings. Haley was the daughter of the leader of the Saint Spear sect. If it weren't for the fight between the 2 queens, Haley might have had a chance of becoming one of the Demon Knight's ace talents. But now, Haley was just a plaything without freedom in Malachi's harem. When Janet saw Zen's real name in the corridor of Emperor, she became very curious about him. And when Haley saw Zen's real name in the corridor of Emperor, she became extremely excited. The news about Lavender's matter had already spread far and wide throughout the Demon Knight. Haley had never expected that Zen would eventually help Lavender get back her throne. His support for Lavender had given the Saint Spear sect a glimmer of hope. That was the only way that Haley would be able to obtain freedom. When the news about Lavender had first spread through the universe through the Roaring Token, the Saint Spear sect members hadn't thought too much about it. From their point of view, it was impossible for Lavender to defeat Elena. Just as Elena had said, Lavender didn't even have the qualifications to fight against her. However, as things had progressed, Zen had even managed to kill Gunter. Not only had he killed Gunter, but he had also killed 3 of the other Supreme Lords as well. Malachi was Gunter's son. In the past few days, whenever Haley saw Malachi looking downcast, she was actually very happy in her heart. At the same time, Haley had kept Zen's name in her mind. She knew that Zen was regarded as the Saint Spear sect's hope, and he was also her greatest hope. So of course, she was extremely happy when she encountered Zen in the illusion battlefield. Despite her excitement, she managed to keep a calm facade. She didn't dare to say or do anything. Zen was still not strong enough at the moment, and he needed to follow his own path. Haley cautiously looked at Zen as a hope, so she would never willingly disturb him. Even though she was very confident in Zen's strength, she didn't want him to be in trouble here because of her. Therefore, Haley chose not to tell Zen about such things, and just said that Malachi was Gunter's son. However, she didn't know Zen's personality. When Zen heard that Malachi was Gunter's son, a warm smile appeared on his face. He looked toward Malachi and asked, "So, you're Supreme Lord Gunter's son, right?" Malachi laughed proudly. "You finally know my identity, but it's too late now for you to regret it and escape. All 5 of you kneel down and let me kill you 3 times. I can consider letting you guys off after that." Not far away, Coleman grinned with his arms folded. "There are 6 of us, not 5. Don't you know how to count?" Even Coleman, who was a bit cowardly, was willing to support and help Haley. Malachi snorted and looked toward Janet. I don't have any other hobbies. I just like collecting beauties. This human beauty is also very attractive. If you can accompany me in this illusion battlefield, I will not kill you. Janet tilted her head, curling her lips. She did not retreat at all, but instead stared straight at Malachi and said, Supreme Lord Gunter is just a low-rank Supreme Lord. If you want me to give you company, the illusion battlefield is not a suitable place. After all, we are just ethereal projections here, and I think you'll enjoy me much more in reality. Where do you live? After leaving the battlefield, whenever I feel like having fun, I can look for you no matter how far away you are from me. Malachi lightly smiled as he stared at Janet's lips. Malachi naturally would not be willing to transcend countless supreme worlds just to find a beautiful woman. But in this illusion battlefield, most of the young warriors didn't want to lose their momentum. They wanted to win all the time, even in silly arguments with others. As long as this woman wasn't the daughter of a supreme lord, and was only a talent of an ordinary 10th grade sacred place, it wouldn't be difficult for Malachi to take her away. The G clan, Janet said simply. After that, she flashed a charming smile at Malachi and continued, would you still dare to come? Forget your useless father, even if the Queen of Punishment herself brings you to the G clan, would you dare to come and take me away? Janet was indeed not the direct descendant of a supreme lord, but her status in the G clan was second only to the two G clan's ace talents. The G clan was so powerful that no one in the universe would dare to go to the G clan's place and recklessly take away a clan member. Therefore, when Janet told him about her background, Malachi was shocked. He had never expected that the woman in front of him would be from the G clan. Humph, I don't care where you came from. We are in the illusion battlefield now, and whoever is the strongest wins. Malachi quickly changed the topic. However, Janet laughed at him. You finally get the point. Why didn't you say such words earlier? After she finished speaking, she walked over and patted Zen's arm, which was as sturdy as a divine weapon. She smiled gently and said, I'll be counting on you now. This battle was unavoidable. The two teams moved out of the main city. At the same time, there were also a lot of other warriors behind them. These warriors didn't have the strength to fight with these talents, but they still had the right to stay and watch the fight. Tit for tat, I never expected that woman would be from the G clan. So what if she's from the G clan? She doesn't seem to be an ace talent of the G clan. I don't think that woman intends to make a move. She seems to want that young man to take action. Who is he, anyway? No matter where the two of them are from, they'll be defeated and punished in the end. Malachi is the Demon Knight's ace talent, and also Supreme Lord Gunter's son. His strength is unfathomable. As all the warriors discussed the battle, Haley looked very upset. She rarely commented on such things, and she didn't know what to do at this moment. She could only hope that Zen would really be able to defeat Malachi. Although Zen had displayed extraordinary strength in the Hall of Causality and even tricked and killed an ace talent in the third hall, he hadn't relied solely on his strength to do it. Instead, he had taken advantage of the rules of the hall to kill that ace talent. Would he really be able to defeat an ace talent with his strength alone? Janet, Haley, Jeffrey, Coleman, and Ansel stood atop the city wall. Malachi was the first one to leave the city. He stepped out of the city wall, and after taking a dozen steps, he turned around to look at Zen. Seeing that Zen had not left the city yet, he said, Are you regretting it already? If you want to be known as a cowardly warrior, that's okay. If you continue to stay in the main city, I can't do anything to you. Although Malachi pretended to be generous, he was nervous that Zen wouldn't want to leave the city. If that was the case, then he'd have to say something to provoke Zen. The corner of Zen's mouth curled up slightly. I have no regrets. I'm just waiting for something. If they do not come, perhaps it would be for the best. What are they? Malachi asked curiously. At this moment, there were many small black dots floating over from both sides of the city wall. Cough, KOF, KOF. These were the few hundred small skulls. They were unable to enter the city, so they circled around the walls of the main city. Now that Zen was on the west side of the main city, they naturally gathered together and moved toward him. Zen let out a sigh. It seemed that it would be difficult to shake off these small skulls. Even after leaving the Hall of Causality, they were still able to follow him out. He really didn't know how they managed to do it. What are these things? Malachi was astonished as he stared at the skulls that were constantly moving. As Zen stepped out of the city wall, all the small skulls swarmed toward him, but he didn't flinch in the slightest. He grabbed a small skull in his hand and pointed it at Malachi, a sinister smile appearing on his face. You don't need to know what these little skulls are. You only need to know that since I managed to kill your father, I can also torture you a few times. Chapter 1289, The Saint-Killing Spear. When Zen finished speaking, Malachi was slightly perplexed, and his sharp eyes, which were as slender as willow leaves, were clouded with confusion. After all, Zen's words had come out of the blue. However, the moment he realized what Zen was saying, his entire body suddenly shook, his eyes filling with a strong killing intent. You are Zen Luo. Malachi was the only son of Supreme Lord Gunter. Although the Demon Knight members were all born strong warriors, they were quite weak when it came to reproduction. That was the main factor that restricted the development of the Demon Knight race. Even though Supreme Lord Gunter had many wives, he only had a single descendant, and that was Malachi. His father's death had been a huge blow to him. Now that he'd learned that the young man standing in front of him was the one who had killed his father, he realized that he was facing off against his sworn enemy. Although he had never seen Zen before, he had already imagined countless times in his mind what his enemy was like, and he had sworn that he would kill Zen with his own hands in this lifetime. However, he had never thought that he would encounter Zen in the illusion battlefield. No way, that guy is Zen. You mean the guy that killed the 4 Supreme Lords? By the way, the stories he told through the Roaring Token are really quite interesting. This is going to be exciting. Zen is a warrior of the Soul Sea realm, so it's not surprising that he has entered the illusion battlefield. We're so lucky to see him here. I want to know just how strong this fellow is, since he has the ability to kill Supreme Lords. When Zen's identity was revealed, it immediately caused heated discussions among the warriors watching from the city walls. A while ago, everyone had seen this as a fight between 2 powerful warriors. But most of them had bet on Malachi to win, since they were confident that Malachi would make his opponents suffer with his superior strength. But after finding out that Malachi's opponent was the famous Zen, their views had completely changed. They felt like the tables had turned. Zen was a legendary warrior. Although his strength was nothing extraordinary, he enjoyed a fame that was perhaps even greater than that of some of the Supreme Lords. Although there were only 128 Supreme Lords in the Supreme Worlds, many martial artists could not name all of them. However, when it came to Zen, it was impossible for them not to know him, because this fellow had used the Roaring Token to bombard their ears for 6 whole years. Yes, I am Zen Luo. Zen nodded. Killing aura immediately soared from Malachi's body. The killing aura condensed into a demon-like form in the air. I really didn't expect to meet you in the illusion battlefield, Malachi said as he stared firmly at Zen. His eyes were filled with killing intent, as if he wanted to directly pierce through Zen with them. Unfortunately, this is the illusion battlefield. I can't kill you in the real sense. Although the killing intent in his eyes was strong, the expression on his face was extremely cautious. Some people said that Zen had only relied on that mysterious fairy palace to achieve what he was now, and without that, he was just an ordinary warrior who had ascended from the lower world. But Malachi had disregarded such rumors as soon as he'd heard them. Since this fairy palace possesses the ability to kill Supreme Lords, its legacies aren't something to be trifled with. Just now when Zen was in the main city, he already knew that I am Supreme Lord Gunter's son, but he didn't tell me his identity. Instead, he exposed his identity after we came out of the main city. It's obvious that he thought that if he'd exposed his identity when we were in the city, I would be afraid and refuse to come out of the main city to fight with him. Does that mean that I should be actually scared of him? Is he that confident that he has the ability to kill me? As these thoughts flashed in his mind, Malachi quickly analyzed the situation. He wasn't a brainless person, otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to become an ace talent. Even the son of a Supreme Lord had to rely on his own talent and hard work if he wanted to become an ace talent of his race. Therefore, although many of the sons of the Supreme Lords in the universe had outstanding talent, they hadn't been able to become ace talents. The malicious aura that had emitted from Malachi and loomed in the air like a demon gradually dissipated. Although Malachi's malicious aura was strong, he did not rely on it to face his enemies. It was only a way for him to vent his emotions. After he calmed down, the malicious aura from his body dissipated completely. He appeared very composed now. Although he could not actually kill Zen in the illusion battlefield, he knew that this fight would be a rehearsal because the real battle between him and Zen would happen sooner or later. You are very confident. It's a good thing to have self-confidence. For a warrior who wants to cultivate martial arts, the most important quality to have is a strong warrior spirit. However, it's foolish to be overconfident. Malachi's calm face revealed a cold smile. With a flick of his fingers, 2 pointed spearheads shot out of his space ring. It was a spear with a strange shape. 2 snake-like forms, one black and one white, were coiled together to form the shaft of the spear. They wound all the way to the top, where they separated to form 2 spearheads. It was a double-pointed spear with 2 spearheads. As Zen focused his gaze on this spear with a unique double helix structure, his brows furrowed slightly. A black and white double helix double-pointed spear. He remembered hearing about something like this from Lavender. Zen, be careful, that is the saint-killing spear of the demon knight, Haley, who was on top of the city wall, warned in a low voice. Haley wasn't the only one who had recognized the spear. When the other warriors of the demon knight saw it, their expressions became incomparably solemn. The saint-killing spear, it was the strongest weapon of the demon knight. Since ancient times, the demon knight had passed it down from one deserving warrior to another. Throughout the years, it had stayed within the top 10 ranks of the universe spirit tablet without ever dropping in rank. This saint-killing spear didn't belong to any specific person, not even to Lavender. But according to the rules of the demon knight, Lavender was the only one who had the right to use this saint-killing spear. But now, Malachi had brought it into the illusion battlefield. The many members of the demon knight sighed internally. In the past, this sort of thing would never have happened. After the illusion battlefield opened, many ace talents had indeed borrowed the supreme divine weapons of their races to help them in their battles. For example, Jeffrey had borrowed the Buddha Curse Blade. After all, it was only a projection of the Buddha Curse Blade, so there was no way it could be lost or damaged. However, the Saint-killing spear was not just a supreme divine weapon. Like the Saint Thunder Meteor Hammer, it was also a symbol of the supreme identity of the Queen of the Demon Knight. The Saint Thunder Meteor Hammer was a symbol of the Queen of Punishment, while the Saint-killing spear was a symbol of the Queen of Killings. How could such a treasure be lent to an ace talent? Alas, the current Demon Knight is too reckless. Ever since Elena made the move to attack Lavender, the Demon Knight race has barely had any respect for the rules. Anyway, the top leaders are the ones who set the rules, and they can change them whenever they want. Some of the Demon Knight members who were watching from the top of the city wall couldn't help but sigh. Malachi gripped the saint-killing spear tightly in his hand. He stared at Zen and said coldly, I originally wanted to use this saint-killing spear to fight against the godly geniuses. I never thought that I would use it right now. Right now, they were only in the first stage of the illusion battlefield, and the battles would only get more and more intense from here on. As he spoke, he gently waved his long spear and aimed it at Zen. You should feel proud to be facing off against such a precious weapon. Hearing his words, Zen grinned. It really is a great honor. But this spear doesn't seem to belong to you, does it? Since it is in my hands, of course it belongs to me, Malachi said proudly with his head held high. As a member of the Demon Knight, of course he understood the significance of the saint-killing spear. As Zen stared at the spear, he pondered in his heart, what a pity. If I could get the saint-killing spear and use the reward from the Hall of Causality to make a duplicate for Lavender, it would be perfect. As he thought of this, Zen slowly took out his longsword from his space ring, the Thunder Wind Divine Sword. As he moved his longsword, the corners of his mouth slightly curled up. Since you are so shameless to claim that the Demon Knight's saint-killing spear is yours, then I have nothing to say. If you have nothing to say, then go to perdition. At this moment, Malachi attacked without any warning. Although he was confident that he could defeat Zen, he was an aloof and stubborn person. Even if he had the absolute advantage, he would still go all out, especially now that he wasn't sure of Zen's real strength. He always favored launching surprise attacks. The saint-killing spear suddenly spun around in Malachi's hand, and 2 cold glints flashed from the 2 tips of the spear. Then, he thrust the spear towards Zen. A huge spear shadow appeared from the saint-killing spear, crazily circling in the air before shooting towards Zen. The power hidden within the spear shadow was intimidating. It was as if it could pierce through everything. This was the most basic cultivation method of the saint-killing spear, shadowy spin. Be careful, Janet exclaimed from the top of the city wall. Chapter 1290, Not Indestructible. When Janet saw the saint-killing spear, she was frightened. The lofty wood in her body was warning her, and she could sense something special about that spear. One of the 2 materials used to make the saint-killing spear was black and the other white. They seemed to resonate with the lofty wood in her body. She had no idea that the black and white spear shafts of the saint-killing spear were also made of the other 2 kinds of divine wood. There was the ray wood in the east, the sunrest wood in the west, the lofty wood in the north, and the hidden wood in the south. These were the 4 kinds of legendary divine wood. And they all existed above the heavens. From the 4 types of wood, ray wood had never appeared in the universe. Lofty wood had only appeared when Janet was born. However, the hidden wood and the sunrest wood had been set up here since the birth of the universe. This was because the sunrest tree was the sun's resting place. The sun that illuminated everything was extremely important for the birth of the numerous living beings of the universe, and the final step in constructing the universe was to light up the sun, and the existence of the sunrest tree was the key to achieving this. The hidden tree grew extremely fast. Its roots were everywhere, supporting the 100,000 supreme worlds and a million great worlds. And even though the hidden tree drew all the worlds together, it couldn't be seen. That was why it was called the hidden tree. The hidden wood was white, while the sunrest wood was black. The saint-killing spear was made of a piece of hidden wood and a piece of sunrest wood intertwined with each other. When Janet felt the power of the two kinds of divine wood, she had to warn Zen. But he already knew that this spear's shadow was not to be withstood. He turned and dashed to the side in a swift movement. 8 smoky melodies. The spear shadow was heading straight to him fast. Without a thought, Zen instantly activated the 8 smoky melodies. Zen dodged. With the impact of the 8 smoky melodies, the spear swept past his body and stabbed the city wall. Rumble, 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 could be heard. Something weird was happening in the city wall. The city wall was indestructible, but a small hole had been drilled out by the wild and violent spinning of the spear shadow. The spear had 2 points, and it forcefully dug out a piece from the city wall. What power is this? Even Zen couldn't believe what he was seeing. Although the spear only drilled out a fist-sized hole in the city wall, it was enough to shock everyone present. The city wall contained the law of the heavens. The law of heavens should make the city wall impenetrable. Few warriors could dig a hole in the city wall. Not a soul sea realm warrior, a spirit supreme realm warrior, a spirit transformation realm warrior, or a world lord. They wouldn't even be able to take a tiny piece of it. A supreme lord, however, might be able to break the city wall, but it was only because they had the heavenly destiny and mastered part of the law of the heavens. However, the saint-killing spear was originally a weapon that was from above the heavens. It was able to penetrate through the law of the heavens, and thus it was able to damage the wall. Humph, you're dodging pretty fast, but let's see how much longer you can take it. Malachi kept on spinning his spear over and over again. This shadowy spin was a basic spear skill of the saint-killing spear. It didn't consume much life vitality, but it was extremely powerful. The enormous shadows of the spear shot towards Zen. Swish, swish, swish. Some spear shadows were aimed at the ground outside the city wall and drilled into the ground and disappeared. Everyone was wondering what was going on and where those spear shadows were going. A rumbling sound echoed through the ground. Other spear shadows shot towards the city wall and kept on inflicting small holes in the city wall. Just as Zen dodged one of them, the spear shadow suddenly shot over into the main city. On the walls of the main city there was an invisible and very thin layer of protection formed by the law of the heavens that protected the city. The spear had actually been able to penetrate through the invisible barrier. The top of the city wall was densely packed with warriors. Everyone thought that the inside of the main city was absolutely safe. No matter how bad the fight between the warriors was, they couldn't cross or break the barrier to get inside. In order to get a better view of what was going on, the martial artists had stuck close to the edge of the city wall. PFF'd. Accompanied by a sound that was like air leaking out, the spear pierced through the protective barrier and stabbed one of the warriors standing on the city wall. It happened so fast the martial artist did not even have time to react. He was focused on watching Zen and his strange movement technique of constantly dodging. He was so immersed in learning Zen's techniques that he never saw the spear coming as it ripped through his body. The spear shadow pierced through the martial artist's chest, leaving a smooth, round hole of blood in his chest. It had penetrated through his heart. However, he still maintained his standing posture and his expression didn't change. Not until the warrior beside him pointed at his chest and said, "You." The warrior looked down and saw the big hole in his chest. He realized what happened and fell to the ground with a loud bang. The illusion points appeared and the warrior's corpse gradually disappeared, his soul flying into the main city to be resurrected. It was said that there were times when people had died and they weren't aware of it, so that even though their life force had been cut off, they could still walk no different from living people. It was not until someone else told them about their death that they would die right away. No one was sure where that legend came from, but it had just happened. When the warriors standing on the city wall saw that warrior being hit by the spear and dying, their faces changed drastically. They understood that the city wasn't indestructible. The law of the heavens was domineering and tyrannical, but, in the end, there were still some powerful cultivators that could break through it. All the warriors on top of the city wall started to retreat. They wanted to watch the event happening before their eyes, but they didn't want to lose their lives over it. Although they were able to revive after death in the illusion battlefield, no one wanted to risk it. Retreat, retreat, everyone retreat, find a farther spot to watch. I was just standing behind that warrior. I was so lucky that the spear shadow was quickly erased by the heavens, or I wouldn't have been able to escape death. The warriors all left the city wall and crowded on top of the other buildings to watch the battle. Some of the timid warriors didn't want to give up the opportunity to watch the battle, so they decided to find a corner to watch it. There were much fewer warriors on the city wall now. However, Janet, Haley, Jeffrey, Coleman and Ansel did not choose to leave. Their strength might be a little weaker than Zen's and Malachi's, but they could still face the battle. When the spear shadow penetrated through the light film, it slowed down, giving them enough time to dodge it. The warriors who were following Malachi didn't leave either. These people were some of the bolder warriors or warriors who liked to show off their strength. So they remained standing on top of the city wall. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. The spear shadow was incredibly fast and Zen could only maintain an extremely high speed as he dodged around Malachi. In less than 2 minutes, Zen had already dodged over 100 spear shadows, every one of them dangerous. He had to rely on his own strength and the 8 smoky melodies to do this, and he was getting tired. If this continues, I won't be able to keep up. I'll be hit by a spear's shadow. Zen was very confident in the strength of his physical body, but he didn't think that he would be able to take a strike without getting hurt. Suddenly another spear shadow flashed past him, and at the same time, a dark golden longbow appeared in his hands. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. The minute the longbow appeared in his hand, 3 streaks of black light shot out from him. 3rd rank divine weapons. Childish. Malachi's face was filled with disdain as the long spear in his hand spun twice like a windmill. Clank, clank, clank. With 3 clear sounds, the 3 black arrows were easily sent flying away by the saint-killing spear. Chapter 1291. The Spear and the Sword. The longbow had been obtained from the 4 divine kingdoms and could be considered to be a semi-divine weapon. Zen did not expect it to cause any problems for Malachi. As he shot the 3 arrows, sword in one hand, his figure like a shuttle, he rapidly approached Malachi. As Malachi pushed away the 3 arrows, he saw Zen heading straight for him, his expression as calm as ever. Truth be told, even though Malachi was an ace talent, he felt a bit uneasy realizing that his opponent was Zen. As of now, most races were not wary about Zen killing the Supreme Lords. However, many large clans still sent out their world lords to surround the fairy palace. For the past 5 to 6 years, they had not let up for even a moment. Their target was not Zen, but the fairy palace itself. Zen was a strong adversary, for he had inherited the fairy palace. However, upon seeing the 1st-rank divine weapon in Zen's hand, Malachi felt more at ease. Is the fairy palace short of weapons? How can he fight me with a 1st-rank divine weapon? It seems as though the rumors about the inheritance of the fairy palace have been exaggerated a bit, Malachi thought to himself. Of course, he was not aware that the fairy palace did not have any ready-made weapons, but it did have some extremely rare materials. He only knew that by relying on the saint-killing spear, he would be in an invincible position. Immature brat. Seeing Zen advance toward him, Malachi swung the long spear. A blood-red light emanated from it. Like a dragon, it circled the air once before spreading out like a fan. Twin Kill Intent. Twin Kill Intent was the 2nd skill of the saint-killing spear. The spear possessed a pure destructive power. A few supreme divine weapons on the Universe Spirit Tablet had distinct uses. Some weapons contained strange laws of causality and their killing techniques were different. In terms of pure destructive power and sharpness of the weapon, the saint-killing spear was certainly ranked among the top 3 weapons. Shoot! As the blood-red light beam unfurled in the air, Zen frowned. He was forced back dozens of feet. Spear in hand, a sneer surfaced on Malachi's face. I did not expect the famous Zen Luo to turn out to be such a coward. You retreat and escape when you fight others. Interesting. Ever since the time the 2 of them had started fighting, Zen had been stepping back continuously. It looked as if he could not harm a hair on Malachi's head. It's obvious what will happen. The saint-killing spear is the #1 killing weapon of Demon Knight. With that weapon, even an ordinary martial artist will have the strength to fight an ace talent. Look, Malachi merely relies on the power of the saint-killing spear. Martial artists discussed the fight among themselves in low voices. The others who were in favor of Malachi overheard this. What did you say? One of them asked, smirking. Malachi only relies on the power of the saint-killing spear. Then why don't you get the spear yourself? Fights among martial artists were never fair. Someone stronger in every aspect was bound to exist in this world. His talent would be greater, his luck better, and the weapon in his hand much stronger. There was no point in discussing what was inevitable. Zen did not complain, even to himself. As Malachi wielded the saint-killing spear, he perceived the spear and Malachi as a whole. All he wondered about was how to defeat Malachi, who was using the spear as his weapon. Zen, who floated in the air, raised the long sword in his hand. His hand traced the blade of the long sword and moved to the tip. Eventually, his 2 fingers came to a halt at the tip of the Thunder Wind Divine Sword. He caught hold of it, pointing the hilt toward Malachi. It was a strange thing to do. Janet, Coleman, and Haley were all puzzled to see it. Zen blinked, his eyes shining. Previously in the corridor of Emperor, Zen had gained a new understanding of the god's intimidating strike. Sword Chen had created many sword techniques. On the peak of the Killing Sword Mountain, Zen once fought him with 1,000,000 sword moves. As a matter of fact, that had only been an exchange of swords, not a competition. What played were sword moves, but what sparred were the understanding of sword techniques from both sides. It had been like a game of chess, but with swords as the chess pieces, the two had pondered over every move before straining their nerves to test the other's true strength. God's intimidating strike was not limited to one strike. On the contrary, it could be transformed into any sword move. Its owner could change it into various forms. At any crucial juncture, the key to God's intimidating strike was to use the most appropriate sword move and launch an intimidating attack. In order to do this, a martial artist had to play the role of the chess player. Not only did he have to be very familiar with himself and his actions, he also had to predict the opponent's every move. Zen pointed the hilt of his sword at Malachi, foreseeing his opponent's next step. Malachi looked indifferently at Zen. "Don't bother playing any cheap tricks." He thrust the saint-killing spear at Zen once again. With a shadowy spin, over 10 giant spear shadows shot out, rushing at Zen straightaway. At the moment, Zen stood rooted to the same spot, still turning the tip of Thunder Wind Divine Sword in his hand. Why is he not dodging the shadows? If he doesn't step out of the way, I'm afraid he'll be killed by those spear shadows. Zen, don't just stand there. Do something. When the flying spear shadows were less than 10 feet away from Zen, his eyes opened at once. A hint of a smile lingered on his face, but once that smile faded away, any speck of emotion disappeared from his eyes. He entered an exceedingly wondrous state with his emotions closed off. In this state, nothing persisted in his mind. There was neither joy, nor fear. With a flick of his finger, the long sword swung through the air in another direction. Holding the long sword in his hand, Zen charged at the spear shadows. The long sword swiveled as he raised the sword. Raising sword was a basic sword technique, but now Zen had a newer understanding of this most ordinary method. With the sword raising, he could block any attack. Clang! The first giant spear shadow pierced through the air. The onlookers saw the long sword in Zen's hand shake slightly. The spear shadow deviated from its target, flying in a different direction altogether. Clang! The second giant spear shadow underwent the same treatment. Clang! 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 The spear shadows shot out one by one and Zen felt as if there existed an invisible force field in front of him. The giant spear shadows approaching him were all pushed away by this invisible force. The spectators had their eyes wide open in disbelief. To perform this action, Zen had relied on a single ordinary defensive sword move, raise sword. The long sword was not placed on the top of the spear. Rather, it was placed along the spear shaft. This was the spear's weakness, or rather its tender spot. In general, the Thunder Wind Divine Sword would have been unable to confront the giant spear shadows head-on. However, under these circumstances, Zen's grasp was exceptionally accurate, to the point that it made one's hair stand on end. Shadowy spin. Seeing this, Malachi felt panic rise in his heart. The spear shadows raced in the air, but they could not stop Zen in the slightest. Zen defended himself very well. Just how was he doing it? He did not give Malachi much time to think. The essence of the god's intimidating strike was everywhere, oppressing his opponent, not giving him a break. Clang! 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 Pushing away the gigantic spear shadows, Zen approached Malachi. Malachi, hell awaits you. The saint-killing spear still exuded a blood-red light. Twin kill intent. Clang! Zen raised the Thunder Wind Divine Sword once more. This time, he placed the sword on the upper half of the shaft of the saint-killing spear. The previously unrivaled twin-killing intent was broken off by Zen's sword before it could even be unleashed. As an ace talent, Malachi's response time was fast. The moment his spear was blocked by Zen, he faltered in his steps, retreating at once. At the same time, the long spear wedged beneath his armpit shrank. As he stepped back, the spear spun round in a circle. Just as it was pulled back, it charged at Zen from a different direction. Cycle stab. Malachi became more anxious. He did not have time to activate the techniques of the saint-killing spear and instead employed his usual spear technique. However, Zen had anticipated this. He knew Malachi would make this move, so he moved his body half a foot to the left in advance. Malachi's shot failed and slid past Zen's shoulder. Fights between martial artists were as unpredictable as a game of chess. One wrong move could end in death. Zen was a person with foresight. After he tricked Malachi into showing his weakness, he followed his opponent like a shadow. He would not give his rival the slightest chance to get back in the game. Chapter 1292, Help. If Zen's full strength erupted right now, he could forcefully and violently take Malachi down. The saint-killing spear was truly formidable. On the other hand, if Zen kept dodging the sharp tips of the spear while using the explosive power of the god's intimidating strike along with the immense supply of chaotic energy, Zen could exhaust Malachi and kill him. Besides, Zen had gained a lot after battling Sword Chen. And Malachi was a perfect warrior for Zen to practice the sword on. As they drew closer to each other, the two began to engage in close combat. Malachi retreated quickly in an attempt to get rid of Zen, but Zen would never give him the chance to shake him off. He managed to stay at a distance of 3 feet from him at all times. Malachi struck and stabbed, swinging the saint-killing spear around. But no matter which move he used, Zen anticipated the movement of the saint-killing spear each time it reached about halfway to him and used the Thunder Wind Divine Sword to block the spearhead from harming him. This way, he was able to break Malachi's moves. Malachi felt like he was being shackled by an invisible chain. And here he had been confident because he was an ace talent who had the saint-killing spear. Even godly geniuses would find it difficult to defend themselves against the spear when it struck out. The ace talents were way below them. But the problem now was that he couldn't thrust out the spear and reach his opponent. Zen stood there, expressionless as a zombie. But it was humiliating to Malachi, because it felt like Zen was mocking him. The warriors on the city wall were surprised as they saw them fighting. It didn't look like a fight between two powerful warriors of the Soul Sea realm. Zen is really strong. He didn't even use any martial skill and sealed all of Malachi's moves with just a long sword. Malachi is stupid. It's such a waste for him to have the saint-killing spear. He has almost no chance of fighting back. If I were him, I would definitely burn my bridges and give Zen a fatal counterattack. I think it's you who are stupid. In this kind of situation, Malachi won't stand a chance even if he wants to go all out because Zen would have killed him long before that. Janet held the flame kitten in her arms and stared at Zen's moves, her eyes flashing. This guy seems to be practicing the sword. I've underestimated Zen's strength and courage if he is using an ace talent to practice the sword, Jeffrey said with a faint smile. Although Zen's previous performance had been stunning, everyone had only regarded him as someone who could be compared to an ace talent. The strength of ace talents differed greatly. For example, Lucille was the strongest among the ace talents, and her power was already close to that of a godly genius. As long as she gained some insights of the godly way and became a godly genius, she would be able to become a candidate for a true god. On the other hand, there was still quite some way to go for ordinary ace talents before they could become godly geniuses. But now, Janet altered her judgment. He's on par with Lucille at her peak condition. She thought, impressed. Get out of my way. Malachi could feel his heart fill with resentment. If Zen really had unparalleled strength, it would be okay even if Zen killed him. But this fellow was slippery. He was only extremely cautious and agile and was able to block his every move. So even though Malachi had the strength, he was unable to bring it into play. If they had fought face to face, Malachi would have long since pierced countless holes through Zen. The resentment grew like wild grass in Malachi's heart. The saint-killing spear in his hand danced wildly like a spinning wheel as he tried to force Zen away. However, it seemed as if Zen and the spear were inseparable. No matter how fast the spear spun, Zen's body would spin just as fast. What kind of a freaky bodily movement skill was this? Malachi cursed internally. This guy was a ghost that could not be shaken off. When Malachi's saint-killing spear stopped, Zen was still holding his sword, standing close to him and staring at him expressionlessly. Go to perdition. The saint-killing spear suddenly bounced back, thrusting towards Zen like a wild dragon probing the sea. His movement was fast and fierce, and together with the formidable saint-killing spear, no one could defend against it. He was confident as he brought the saint-killing spear into the illusion battlefield to fulfill his goal of entering the top 10 of the illusion battlefield. But no matter how fierce his movement was or how powerful his weapon, if they couldn't unleash their power, they would be useless. The spear was only able to reach halfway to Zen before the Thunder Wind Divine Sword met the spear shaft. The spear swung away, dinging faintly. Zen was like a patient chess player, skillfully displaying his skills and controlling the whole situation, neither taking a step forward, nor a step back. He was full out testing his insights into the swordsmanship. But Malachi was becoming more and more irritable by the minute. He was about to lose his mind from this feeling of helplessness, just as a wave of anger began to gather in his chest. The anger was stuck there. He could neither swallow it nor spit it out. The gap between Malachi and Zen hadn't been huge at first. But to the crowd, the fight between Malachi and Zen was like an adult teaching a child a lesson, with the latter having almost no way to fight back. Haley, who had been watching the fight this entire time, was now very excited, her face full of astonishment and happiness. Before the battle had started, she had thought that Zen might have a chance to win. But she had never expected such an outcome. Zen had easily wrapped the arrogant Malachi around his little finger. Just like that. As the two of them fought, they gradually moved closer to the city wall. A few warriors sat on top of the city wall, watching this scene gloomily. Malachi seems to be unable to defeat Zen. It's not that he can't defeat him. If the full strength of the saint-killing spear is fully unleashed, Zen won't be a match for Malachi. It's just that this fellow's swordsmanship is strange, and he's controlling the situation to prevent Malachi from bringing out his full strength. We should go help. The rule of the illusion battlefield at the current stage was that there were no rules. It was a fight between Zen and Malachi, but there was no rule forbidding anyone to lend a helping hand. The martial artists that followed Malachi also understood that they only needed to help Malachi to find a chance to unleash his power, so that he could rely on the saint-killing spear to kill Zen. So the 8 warriors leapt up at the same time and left the city wall. Dang, those guys want to get involved in the battle. Janet's bright eyes flashed, her expression hardening. Let's go to help too, Jeffrey said suddenly. Haley also jumped off the city wall at the same time. Zen was standing up for her after all. Seeing the warriors of the two groups getting ready to join the battle, the other warriors who were watching the fight suddenly became excited. More people are getting involved. Ha ha, the fight is going to be even more interesting this time. I'm afraid the warriors from Zen's side will be at a disadvantage. After all, Malachi has more people. The martial artists that followed Malachi were all friends he had made in the Hall of Causality, and they also had great strength. Right after they left the city wall, the 8 warriors clearly divided their duties. 2 of them went to help defend Malachi against Zen, 3 of them directly attacked Zen, and the rest went to intercept the warriors who were coming to help Zen. There seemed to be nothing wrong with this kind of division of labor. But they had missed something. They had miscalculated Zen's strength. They thought that Zen couldn't get distracted as he had to be fully focused on blocking Malachi's moves. However, the moment they left the city wall, a sword intent that was rapidly shrinking began to form on Zen's sword. He brandished his sword and thrust it at them. God's intimidating strike. The rapidly shrinking sword intent drew an arc in the air. The sword intent went along the city wall, and headed towards the warriors that were coming to attack him. The strong sword intent swept over the top of the city wall. The 2 martial artists who had just leapt off the city wall were taken by surprise. They didn't even have the time to react before Zen's sword intent struck them down. A trail of blood erupted from their bodies and they fell off the wall. This shocked every martial artist present there. Even Malachi, who had been tortured by Zen's relentless blocking, looked stunned. Was this the true strength of this fellow? Silence reigned both inside and outside of the main city. But Zen didn't stop there. His first strike had killed 2 warriors and he didn't hesitate as he thrust out the second strike. Zen's actions seemed to fall into a certain pattern once he had completely entered the state of emotion closing. He began to mercilessly attack his opponents. God's intimidating strike. The long sword slashed out. Another sword intent struck through the air, and the second strike killed 3 more warriors. In the span of a few seconds, Zen had killed 5 warriors with his God's intimidating strike. All these 5 warriors were Malachi's followers. When the remaining martial artists on Malachi's side saw this, they didn't hesitate before turning around and fleeing back to the main city. They were now depressed. Just where had this fellow learned this sword strike from? It was simply too powerful. Chapter 1293, The Final Offering. The 2 sharp sword moves suddenly appeared and slashed through the air, which caused everyone to be stunned. Janet and the others had concluded that Zen must have only been testing Malachi's strength. Despite Zen not using his full strength in that attack, it still caught his opponents off guard. They were all in shock after the attack. making it difficult to find their balance as they floated in the air. During the tests in the Hall of Causality, Zen had not showcased the god's intimidating strike. He only used his strong body and monstrous strength in the Hall of Causality. Despite that, he was still considered the strongest among his group. "I guess he can handle this on his own," Janet sobbed and said. Although she didn't like the idea of Zen fighting alone, she was sure that he would win this battle. Meanwhile, onlookers gathered to watch the battle between Zen and Malachi. Many of them came here to secretly observe regardless of their lives. At first, they had other intentions while watching Zen and Malachi. From what they could see, these young men already obtained a large number of illusion points and they would surely benefit from killing them. If they obtained half of their illusion points, their rankings would skyrocket and that would help them swiftly enter the forefront of this supreme world. As they watched, they waited for the right moment to attack. If they attacked, they could either succeed or not. If they did succeed, they could obtain many illusion points. If not, the worst that could happen was be killed in the illusion battlefield and sent back to the main city. However, after witnessing the terrifying strength that Zen had unleashed, they knew that their crazy plan wouldn't work. They wouldn't waste any effort in something that they knew would be a failure from the start. Malachi, who was wielding the saint-killing spear, turned pale and trembled. He seemed to be in a daze. Zen stared at him and asked in a frigid voice, "Shall we continue?" Zen didn't intend to kill Malachi right away. He only wanted to hurt his confidence because in that way, Malachi would lose his focus. Unfortunately, since they were in the illusion battlefield, Zen wouldn't be able to shatter Malachi's dedication to martial arts. So, the best he could do was to ruthlessly strike at his confidence. Swoosh! Malachi thrust his saint-killing spear out once more. Clang! But like his first attempt, he didn't succeed. Zen had deflected it with his long sword. After this, Malachi heard Zen's arctic voice again. "I didn't expect an ace talent of the Demon Knight to be weak. I'm disappointed." Malachi couldn't thrust out the saint-killing spear anymore. His back was pressed against the wall this time and he had no way to escape. He could only look at Zen with despair in his eyes. But even under the constant pressure, he still wanted to get rid of this devilish fellow. "You must have already realized the mistake that you made. A sharp weapon is good, but you've already lost your confidence. And since you always rely on your spear, you have forgotten to bring out your real strength." As Zen spoke those words, the expression on his face lightened up. A faint smile crossed his face and his eyes started to glow. On the other hand, those words shattered Malachi's heart into pieces. It was as if he was slapped with the bitter truth. Zen was right. Since the battle began, Malachi had solely relied on the techniques of the saint-killing spear and had never used his abilities. And ever since Zen had successfully blocked his attacks, Malachi became extremely passive. If only Malachi knew how to utilize his strength instead of relying on his spear, he might have a chance to defeat Zen. The saint-killing spear was quite a powerful weapon, and it had much better techniques if its owner knew what it was capable of. Unfortunately, Malachi didn't know this. Since it was forged, the saint-killing spear had been driven by the faith energy of the Queen of Killings. If a martial artist used his life vitality to yield the spear, it would become an extraordinary weapon. But right now, in the hands of Malachi, it could not show its true form. "I guess you're right. I relied too much on the spear," Malachi said in a low voice. But in the blink of an eye, a cold smile crossed Malachi's face. "But you have also made a mistake." "What mistake?" Zen asked as he stared at Malachi's face. "Well, you may have cornered me. But you shouldn't have celebrated too early." Malachi saw the disbelief on Zen's face. But before Zen could say a word, two thin but sharp vines started appearing from the saint-killing spear's shaft. One of the vines was colored black, and the other one was white. They grew exponentially and drilled into Malachi's arms. No one knew what Malachi was doing. Only Lavender would have figured out what he was planning to do. Malachi was offering himself to the saint-killing spear. It was said that the Queen of Killings of the Demon Knight, the one who first yielded the spear, led her subordinates to block the invasion of the other races. The Queen of Killings didn't want to fail her subordinates even at the expense of her own life. In the face of an undefeatable opponent, she activated the final move of the spear by offering herself to the spear. By doing so, all her meridians were replaced by sunrest wood and hidden wood. She became an indestructible killing machine controlled by the spear. Her combat strength increased exponentially, and she lasted for a period. Most of the past queens of killings who used this technique in a battle didn't survive. But before they died, they would kill 2 or 3 of Supreme Lords. Back then, Lavender was attacked by Elena. In the middle of a fierce battle, Lavender didn't choose to offer herself to the saint-killing spear because she thought that there was still room to maneuver at that time. But she realized she was wrong, only it was already too late. If only she had used the technique, she could have dragged Elena to perdition even when the pool of faith was sealed. In the illusion battlefield, there would be no real death. Even if Malachi died by offering himself to the spear, he would only be sent back to the main city and would still be alive. Thus, there wasn't anything that could stop him from using this technique. As the two vines penetrated Malachi's arms, his face turned pale as if he was in great pain. There were visible bulges under the skin of his arms that were swiftly moving through his body like reptiles crawling under his skin. It was a disgusting sight to see. These vines had quickly spread out through his organs and finally took over his entire body. Watching Malachi's transformation, Zen suddenly felt strange. He sensed something bad was about to happen. It was the same feeling he had during a life-and-death crisis. He couldn't be wrong about this feeling. So, in anticipation of what would happen next, Zen quickly thrust his sword towards Malachi. The sword pierced straight through Malachi's chest. Zen was certain that Malachi wouldn't survive his attack, so he drew his sword back. But to his surprise, there was no trace of blood on the blade. Apparently, Malachi's blood had already been sucked by the saint-killing spear. His blood was already flowing on his black and white spear. Go to perdition. With one swing, the Thunderwind divine sword had started to display unparalleled power. Puff, puff, puff. Zen continued to attack and each slash had left a deep wound on Malachi's body. The meridians in Malachi's body had already been replaced by the two kinds of divine wood, the sunrest wood and the hidden wood. These were the sturdiest and most indestructible types of wood, just like the lofty wood. That was why, despite Zen's continuous heavy attacks, Malachi's body could not be destroyed. Not for long, Malachi finally opened his eyes. They were different from the ones that Zen had seen before. Malachi's eyes were glazed with a deathly aura. And if it wasn't weird enough, he was also making a weird sound. After he offered himself to the saint-killing spear, Malachi became the spear's slave. His body was now a lifeless container that the spear could control. The changes in Malachi's appearance and aura were alarming, and Zen felt his heart becoming heavy. So, without any hesitation, he retreated to the city walls. He made sure there was a great distance between him and Malachi just to be safe. At this moment, Malachi began to move. But it wasn't Malachi anymore, but the spear who was controlling the body's movement. Whoosh! Malachi's movements might have been as stiff as those of a zombie, but his speed was astonishingly fast. It was so fast that even Zen was having difficulty following his move. With a spear in his hand, Malachi had quickly caught up with Zen despite the distance. The spear in his hand moved faster than lightning as it pierced towards Zen. It slashed through Zen's body. It was just a simple attack, but it was fatal because of its speed that even Zen couldn't fathom. In theory, every martial arts skill in the world had its blind spot. But if mixed with speed, even the basic martial arts skill could be unbeatable. When one had reached a high level of speed, every single move could be fatal to his opponent. Even if Zen maximized the 8 smoky melodies and tried his best to twist his body, it would still be difficult for him to dodge. The spear had finally pierced Zen's right chest and through his back, leaving 4 bloody holes on his shoulder. Blood gushed out of his deep wounds. The first strike was a success. There was no doubt that the killing intent of the spear was greater. Before he offered himself to the spear, Malachi had already conveyed the thought of killing Zen onto the spear. So, at this moment, the spear was moving on its own, intending to kill Zen, and it wouldn't stop until Zen was dead. Malachi's right hand gently retracted as the second strike began in no time. But before the spear could hit Zen with another fatal attack, Zen had already turned around and charged into the main city. Chapter 1294, Grab the Spear. Malachi, who had offered himself to the saint-killing spear, could be considered a puppet that only knew killings. As Zen retreated, Malachi chased to kill him. But the city was protected by the rules of the heavens. Malachi, who was wielding the spear, was blocked outside the city walls, just like the small skulls. The only difference was that the skulls had been unable to pierce through the invisible barrier, while Malachi, who was controlled by the spear, could. Boom! The blood-red light of the spear tore through the invisible barrier. He had actually drilled his way into the city. The strength of the body determined the power of the spear. For example, if Lavender had sacrificed herself, she would have been able to display all of the spear's potential. The power she could unleash was breathtaking. Similarly, after Malachi had offered himself to the spear, his own strength had also soared. However, although he had broken through the invisible barrier, he was being held back by the rules of the heavens in the city. Zen retreated rapidly just moments after he entered the city. The spear spun crazily, disobeying the rules of the heavens as it chased after Zen. And right now, Zen had no way to fight back since fighting was prohibited in the city. However, he had no intention of fighting with Malachi. Flying and fighting were prohibited within the city, so he could only retreat. It was fortunate for Zen that under the suppression of the rules of the heavens, Malachi's speed wasn't great. Disobeying the rules required an extremely powerful force. Even though Malachi could resist the rules to a certain extent after being controlled by the spear, it became very difficult for him to move forward. And because of this, he wasn't that faster than Zen. The other martial artists could only watch from the sidelines since they couldn't make a move anyway. On top of the city walls, Zen was retreating all the way back, Malachi getting closer and closer to him. The spinning spear was less than a foot away from Zen's nose. 100 feet, 200 feet, 300 feet. When Zen had run for 1,000 feet, the spear point was less than 2 inches away from his face. But Malachi suddenly froze. Everyone watched the scene unfold before them in complete silence. They had never seen a fight in the city before. A whirring sound could be heard. As a gentle breeze blew, something akin to ash fell off Malachi's body. Soon, his entire body began to disintegrate and collapse into ash. The saint-killing spear fell to the ground with a clang. Malachi had previously relied on the spear to resist the rules to a certain degree. However, there was a time limit for the offering. The stronger one was, the longer the time limit would be. At his current cultivation level of the Soul Sea realm, he could only be controlled by the spear for less than 150 seconds. When all of his vitality had been consumed by the spear and the spear began to wear away, the rules of the heavens formed an irresistible pressure that pressed down on his body, causing it to be crushed into fine powder. A red ray of light floated past Zen. That was Malachi's soul. After his death, he returned to the city to be resurrected. Zen's brow creased. Why hasn't he left any illusion points? Malachi was an ace talent. He had passed the Hall of Causality and had fought around this city for a long time. So the number of illusion points he had inside his body should have been astonishing. But no illusion points left his body, which puzzled Zen. Malachi was ranked 4th in this supreme world and 88th in the illusion battlefield, which were higher than Zen. But no illusion points emerged from his body after his death. Everyone looked around, confused. What's going on? Why didn't the illusion points leave Malachi's body after his death? Isn't this cheating? Maybe he has other methods that we don't know anything about. Zen wasn't the only one who was confused. The others couldn't figure out why either. Janet, Jeffrey, and some other warriors walked down from the city walls and surrounded Zen. Haley heaved a sigh of relief. Even though Zen had to retreat in defeat, he had won in the end. It had been quite risky to fight against an ace talent, but the reward was incomparably generous. The winner would obtain a massive amount of illusion points. A cold laugh rang out suddenly. Zen looked around to find a martial artist walking up to him. Since Malachi was willing to offer himself, he must have had a way out. You must feel it strange, right? The speaker was one of Malachi's followers. When Zen had killed 5 people with 2 sword strikes, the remaining 3 had retreated to the city. This man was one of them. As he walked, he glanced at the saint-killing spear on the ground. According to the rules, once a martial artist died in the illusion battlefield, his clothes, weapons, and space ring would reappear after he was resurrected. The strange thing was that the saint-killing spear didn't disappear. It just lay there on the ground. The martial artist obviously didn't want Zen to have the spear. Since Zen hadn't picked up the spear yet, he approached it as he spoke. And since fights were forbidden in the city, whoever took the spear first would be its owner. While Zen was confused about why he didn't get any illusion points, he saw the martial artist walk over, so he blithely lifted the spear with his toes and tossed it into his space ring. Smiling faintly, he said to the martial artist, "I'm indeed confused. Can you tell me why?" The martial artist froze at Zen's actions and cursed internally. He glared at Zen before saying coldly, "Malachi has obtained 3 exemption medallions. And with these, he won't lose any illusion points at his death." Surprised, "You have killed him once. You still won't get anything even if you kill him twice more. You'd better give me his weapon, or he will definitely not let you off." The spectators came to a realization as they heard his explanation and turned green with envy. Malachi actually had 3 exemption medallions. This was too much. Zen was relieved as he finally knew why, but he was still curious. He himself had obtained a teleportation token, so it would not be strange for Malachi to receive 3 exemption medallions. Malachi's follower tried to threaten Zen, but Zen just smiled and said, "Oh. He's not going to let me off. Can he defeat me without the saint-killing spear?" Regardless of what Malachi was capable of, he had already become cowardly and had lost heart before Zen. Now that Zen had taken his spear away, he didn't have the courage to confront Zen head-on. Malachi was soon revived at the main city and rushed over to Zen. The moment he saw Zen, his face darkened as he asked, "Where is my weapon?" After he had offered himself, his consciousness had been sealed, so he didn't know what had happened until the moment of his death. Now that he saw Zen standing there unscathed, his spear missing, he flew into a rage. "He has taken away your weapon," the martial artist said to Malachi. Malachi's eyes flashed with anger. "Give it back to me," he shouted, stretching out a hand. "The saint-killing spear isn't your weapon in the first place. Why should I give it back to you?" Zen said, smiling. Now that he had the saint-killing spear, Zen had already made plans. Should he spend 5 million illusion points making a trip through the Hall of Causality? If he had enough time, he really wanted to give Lavender a surprise. Malachi stared at Zen for a moment before saying, "I didn't expect Zen Luo, whose name is renowned throughout the universe, to be such a coward. You didn't dare to fight me head-on and even fled to the main city with your tail between your legs. I almost killed you even though you were protected by the laws of the heavens." Since they were not allowed to fight in the city, Malachi could only try to provoke Zen with words. "We can fight after we leave the city," Zen said calmly. "Give me back the spear, and we'll fight again," Malachi said. Zen smiled mockingly at Malachi. "I won't return the spear," he said. "Then forget it. There's nothing you can do about me in the main city," Malachi said coldly. His battle with Zen might not have been that big of a deal. Although Zen had taken away his spear, he should still be able to safely move on to the next stage now that he was ranked 4th in this supreme world. The saint-killing spear was just a projection. It didn't matter if he lost it, but he would have to use his own weapon in the next stage. His gaze swept around and landed on Haley. "You jerk. Come here." Chapter 1295, Change of Rules. After exploring a secret land, Malachi had obtained 3 exemption medallions. He would be invincible with the power of the saint-killing spear. After offering himself up to the saint-killing spear, he could even kill godly geniuses, not to mention the ace talents. But this was possible only when he was in the wilderness. He would definitely kill Zen if he were to fight Zen in the wilderness, far from the main city. The good thing was that Malachi wouldn't lose illusion points even though he had offered himself to the spear. However, after Zen had toyed with him, Malachi was unable to restrain himself. The truth was that his best option was to lead Zen into the wilderness and slay him there. Right from the start, he felt that he could defeat and kill Zen using just his spear. But he lost that opportunity when he fell into a passive situation. That was the prime reason why he chose to sacrifice himself to the saint-killing spear. No doubt it was a foolish plan of action. He was right next to the main city. Even after he sacrificed himself, and his strength increased dramatically, it would still be a Herculean task to kill Zen in the main city. As a result, his saint-killing spear was snatched away by Zen. One could imagine just how perturbed Malachi was at this moment. He naturally had to find some way to vent his frustration. He saw Haley standing not too far away and called out to her. Haley trembled when she heard Malachi's command. "Don't go over to him," Janet whispered. Haley felt a mix of emotions as she stood there motionless. "Jerk, don't forget where you are right now," Malachi yelled nastily as he stared at her. The corner of his mouth showed a hint of a sneer. Haley was still in his palace. While she was in the illusion battlefield, perhaps he couldn't do anything to her, but once she left that place, she was just a toy to him. Haley pursed her lips as sadness filled her eyes. Although she did not share her thoughts, Jeffrey and Janet could see that she didn't have a choice. She trudged towards Malachi. The evil smile on Malachi's face grew wider and wider. His conflict with Zen had started because of her. He had suffered a loss because of Zen, but there was nothing else Zen could do to him. When Haley was halfway there, Zen stood between the two of them once again, and stared calmly at Malachi. "What do you want?" Malachi demanded. His voice carried a hint of ridicule. "Let her go," Zen said softly. "No problem," Malachi laughed deviously. "Give me back my spear first." Zen hesitated a little. He actually had plans to duplicate a saint-killing spear. At this moment, Malachi could also see that although Zen appeared apathetic, he valued his companions. Even though Haley had only ventured into the Hall of Causality once with Zen, he wouldn't sit by idly and watch her suffer. "Ha ha ha, take off your clothes and get everyone in the mood. Let's have an erotic dance from you," Malachi ordered, staring lustily at Haley. When the martial artists surrounding him heard his words, their eyes immediately lit up with lurid excitement. The women of the Demon Knight were all noble and sophisticated. People hardly had a chance to see the beauty of their naked bodies. Deeply humiliated, Haley gritted her teeth. Malachi, she stuttered. Remember, you are not my woman, you are only my plaything. Don't forget your status. You have no choice. The cruel smile on his face intensified. In Malachi's eyes, Haley didn't have a choice in the outside world or the illusion battlefield. The reason was simple. Haley's clan was not the only one in the Saint Spear sect that had been controlled by him. Many people of the Saint Spear sect, including Haley's relatives, were also imprisoned. It was now up to Malachi whether she and the others lived or died. If she didn't do as he said, she would risk everybody's lives. Haley gritted her teeth and swept her gaze across Zen. She then asked softly, Zen, will you and my queen return to Demon Knight? By my queen, of course, she was referring to Lavender, the queen of killings, who the Saint Spear sect had always supported. Zen was slightly surprised by her question. Haley was a reserved person. Although he had a general idea of what was going on between her and Malachi, it was impossible for him to guess the ins and outs of it. After all, he was not a prophet. For 6 years, I've been waiting for the day when you and Lavender would return and save me from that place. I'm very young, only 28 years old, and I still have a chance to become an ace talent of the Demon Knight. I don't want to be reduced to Malachi's plaything. I'm so much more talented than him. But I also know that a few years is not enough time. It's impossible to be that fast. I might not be able to make it to that day. Tears welled up in her eyes as she spoke. She wasn't the only one who was looking forward to this. The entire Saint Spear sect was enduring humiliation and suffering as they struggled to survive. They were all waiting desperately for the day that Lavender would return. Haley was very clear about the consequences of defying Malachi. When she left the illusion battlefield, she would be very miserable in the future. But she also understood that even though Malachi was making things difficult for her, he was actually using her as a pawn to threaten Zen. Now that she understood his motives, she did not want to become a handle against Zen. At this point, she only wanted an answer from him. Looking at her expression, Zen's heart was filled with tenderness. Helping Lavender return to the throne had been a conundrum till now. He and Lavender had gone to the Dark World and sent people back to the Demon Knight, and then Vivica, Elspeth, Salvador, and Anisha had told them that a secret was hidden in a star, but since Zen was trapped in the fairy palace, he had not been able to do anything for the past 6 years. What he didn't know was that so many people in the Demon Knight had very high expectations of him. Zen stared at her and reached out to wipe away the tears on her face. Yes, we will, he said, nodding. It was a short answer, but it was all she needed to hear. After nodding, Haley rubbed her eyes and walked towards her tormentor with a despairing expression on her face. Malachi, in fact, I've always wanted to tell you that if not for your father, you would be nothing more than a piece of trash, she said proudly. She paused for a moment, and then continued, and you're worse in bed. When she finished speaking, there was a relieved expression on her face and she was smiling triumphantly. She had endured enough all these years. Taciturn as she was, she had never talked so much. As a race, the Demon Knight was a lot more open-minded about sex, so she spoke without any restraint. Still, as a man, it was the most insulting thing for a woman to expose his weaknesses in front of everyone, and Haley, who was only one of his playthings, had dared to do so. PFF'd. Not far away, Janet blushed slightly. She couldn't help but laugh. The warriors present there had strange expressions on their faces. Malachi was an ace talent, and a powerful warrior at the Soul Sea realm. He couldn't possibly be bad in bed, right? Jeffrey put his palms together. His expression was calm, but the corners of his mouth turned up slightly. Coleman, on the other hand, was not quite so discreet. He snickered out loud. The laughter from his thick throat was incomparably ear-piercing. Malachi's face stiffened. He stared coldly at Haley, wanting to rip her to pieces with his gaze. Despite his fury, he actually laughed. Ha ha ha, I didn't expect that you would become so bold after entering the illusion battlefield. Very good, do you know what the price for your impudence will be? Death, she said calmly and confidently. At this point, her wish had been fulfilled by Zen's promise. And in any case, she was tired of living like a slave to Malachi. No, Malachi shook his head. How can I let you die so easily? You must be well aware of the most powerful punishment that the Demon Knight has given. Haley flatly replied, punishment of eternal night. That's right, I am going to throw you and your entire clan into the punishment of eternal night. I want you to experience torture in a way that you will never forget. Ha ha ha, Malachi roared with excitement. This was the only outlet for his anger. Zen sighed softly in his heart. All this was happening only because he wasn't strong enough. The sooner he gained more strength, the sooner he would be able to take Lavender back to the Demon Knight. Just then a booming voice sounded. The rules of the illusion battlefield have changed, and the restrictions on battle will be lifted from the main cities, along with the restriction on flying. Chapter 1296, Chaos in the Cities. It was the voice of the mysterious girl. She had declared the rules of the illusion battlefield several times. Only now, the rules had suddenly changed. During the first stage of the illusion battlefield, with the protection of the law of the heavens, the major cities could become a place for the martial artists to protect themselves. As long as you didn't leave the main city, you would be completely safe. Even from those ace talents and godly geniuses. However, the further the battle progressed, the more intense the competition became. Most of the illusion points were gained by only a small number of people. Malachi, for example, had amassed a massive amount of illusion points and was ranked 4th in this supreme world. Before, as long as he didn't leave the main city, it would have been difficult for others to catch up. But now the rules had changed. The main city was no longer a haven for warriors. On the contrary, it was about to become a battleground. After all, almost all of the martial artists were gathered in one or another of the main cities. Only a small number had left the main city to explore the endless wilderness. But now, once the restrictions were removed, all warriors would be free to fight. Instantly, the small skulls that were lingering outside the city wall began to rush into the city and bit Zen's back. The skulls floated from his shoulders downwards, like a cape made of skulls. Malachi had been laughing wildly when the mysterious girl's voice rang out. He stopped, stunned. A smile surfaced to Zen's face as he looked at Malachi. Why aren't you laughing? Before, Malachi had not cared about his defeat. He had 3 exemption medallions in his hand. Even if Zen managed to kill him 3 times, he would not lose any illusion points. Moreover, he would never have rushed out of the city after his saint-killing spear had been taken away. After all, Zen couldn't do anything to him. But who could have known that the restrictions on fighting in the main city would be lifted at this very moment? A cold feeling swept across the back of his neck. He knew that as long as he maintained his position as the 4th-ranked member of the Supreme World, he would surely be promoted to the next stage of the illusion battlefield. And yet, beginning to realize that he might be in danger, Malachi reflexively began to retreat backwards. He had lost the courage to fight Zen head-on. All he wanted now was to escape. Meanwhile, the rest of the main city was in chaos. Not just the city, in fact. Across the illusion battlefield, all 50 Supreme Worlds had been upended. One by one each main city's warriors began to realize that they were now free to kill without restraint. Many immediately fled in all directions. The city was no longer a safe house, it would soon become a slaughterhouse. Elsewhere, in a different Supreme World, a set of slender fingers interlocked and undulated, their movements copied by a set of huge swords. The fingers, followed by the swords, formed a complex array that rained down upon the city. No matter if they were weak, strong, good at hiding, or good at attacking. Almost all of the martial artists in this main city fell to these swords. Margaret tilted her head and surveyed the ruined city, her expression unsatisfied. I got lucky. Since they weren't coming out of the main city, I was planning to leave and look, the rules have changed. What Margaret was doing, exterminating an entire city, might have been extreme, but it was far from rare. Recovering from this onslaught, several warriors turned to try and take down more of the warriors. In the outside world, the names on the pyramid began to shift. Several names shot up to the top of the list, like a surge of power. With their defeats, the majority of the lower-ranking martial artists would have their names fluctuating across the board. The names of the most powerful, on the other hand, were far more stable. These were the names of those at the very top of the food chain. Not only were they not challenged by this change of rules, but in fact, many had already reaped great benefit. In this new order, the strong could plunder more illusion points. When she had previously controlled a main city, Lucille could only gain illusion points twice for every warrior that she killed. If she received too many points from the same warrior, the warriors stopped leaving the city. After all, once they left the city, Lucille would just kill them. For the moment, however, Lucille did not plan to collect more illusion points the old-fashioned way. No, instead she was going to rob the entire city at an extremely high speed. No one would be able to stop her anyway. However, this situation depended on what happened in the main city. The main city where Zen was located was the exit to the Hall of Causality, and there were countless experts within. There were also a few ace talents, including Malachi. No one else, not even Zen, could kill 80% of the martial artists in a city as easily as Margaret had. Haley, Janet, protect yourselves well. As soon as Zen had given this warning, he whirled around to chase after Malachi. Malachi ran. Once he was hundreds of feet away from Zen, he somersaulted and sped towards the sky. But Zen's reaction was just as fast, he followed right on his heels. Although Zen had taken Malachi's saint-killing spear, he did not take away his illusion points. But that was about to change. Zen only had one thought in his mind, and that was those illusion points. At the same time, Janet, Jeffrey, Coleman, Haley, and Ansel were rapidly gathering together. The warriors, who had originally only planned to watch this fight, now had two choices. They could either fight each other or run for their lives like Malachi had. Many of them chose the second option, and fled towards the skies. Those with the fastest reactions managed to get away safely, fleeing into the vast and empty wilderness to take temporary refuge. Many of the rest were not so lucky. They were felled, and after giving half of their illusion points, they slowly revived in a corner of the main city. Janet and company were strong after all. If the five of them were to work together, they could take on even Zen. Other than a few ace talents in the main city, they would not encounter many powerful enemies here. The way they saw it, they were free to claim the spoils of conquest, and no one else would have the chance to plunder them. Here and there, sharp rays of light appeared and vanished. Waves of intensive life vitality fluctuated all over the area. This kind of scene could only be seen during a race war. There had been a rumor over the years that many races in the universe would eventually fall into chaos and launch an unprecedented war, and it looked like this war would be the true battle of the world of chaos. At this very moment, in the illusion battlefield, it was being rehearsed in advance. On the other side, Zen did not allow Malachi to escape too far. At around 10,000 feet, Malachi found himself blocked. Zed held the saint-killing spear deliberately in his hand. With one hand holding the spear and the other holding the sword, he looked at Malachi with a faint smile. Should I kill you 3 times? Or 5, you can choose. If he was killed once, he would lose half of his illusion points. Twice, he would lose 3/4 of his points. If he was killed 3 times, he would lose 7/8 of his illusion points. Malachi's expression turned gloomy. If Zen killed him 3 times, his ranking would fall out of the 100,000 range. That was a loss that he could not accept. With a flip of his hand, he brought out a purple long spear. This was a first-rank divine weapon, and it was also Malachi's life weapon. This spear was a sight to behold. After all, he was the son of a supreme lord. He owned things that an ordinary martial artist couldn't have. But still, this spear couldn't compare to the saint-killing spear. Chapter 1297. The Mutation of the Spear. Malachi glared at Zen, his face sullen and furious as he tried to think of a way to deal with him. Based on his clansman's predictions, the illusion battlefield's first stage would soon be ending. The first stage served to eliminate the majority of the warriors. Only 50 people per Supreme World would most likely go on to the second stage. Since there were 50 Supreme Worlds, that would mean a total of 500 people would advance. Among the trillions of warriors in this boundless universe, these 500 could be considered as the elite among all Soul Sea Realm warriors. They were most likely descendants of world lords, children of supreme lords, ace talents, or godly geniuses. These predictions were based on the fragmented data collated from the last Grand Era. They were not 100% accurate but were still more or less correct. Malachi had already known the existence of the cities, along with the Hall of Causality way before he entered the illusion battlefield. He had spent this entire time fighting and killing warriors on the battlefield every single day. He did not meet any mighty warriors that were his match. As a result, his ranking had climbed up steadily. He was now at the 4th rank of this supreme world, which was already more than enough for him to enter the second stage. He might go down a couple of places, but there was no way he would fall out of the top 50. All he needed to do was choose a nice place in the city to spend the night in and wait for the second stage. However, his plan was immediately derailed upon the sudden changing of the illusion battlefield's rules. Nobody, not even his clansmen, could predict that the prohibition of killing within cities would be lifted. Maybe this fact was never recorded or perhaps their own records were incomplete. Nevertheless, he was truly regretting it now. If not for Haley, then he never would have provoked Zen. And now his spear was in his enemy's hands. How in the world was he supposed to fight him now? Swoosh! A bloody light shone from Malachi's space ring. Driven to an inescapable corner, he now brought out his last resort, his life's treasure, the crane-crying spear. This spear was a first-rank divine weapon considered as a rare treasure. However, it was still far inferior to the saint-killing spear. He knew he was no match for Zen, but his pride as an ace talent forced him to push forward. There was still the tiny sliver of hope for victory if he gave it his all. Dance of the Blood Crane! He shouted. He raised his spear as beams of bloody light shot out and headed straight towards Zen. Zen remained calm as he activated the 8 smoky melodies. The sparring with the Supreme Lord Sword paid off since his understanding of swordsmanship had risen to a whole other level. His in-battle strategy was also enhanced. It was now easier for him to plan his course of action even during an actual battle. This time, Zen chose not to use his sword. Instead, he raised the spear he acquired from his opponent and raised it against him. He wasn't as good at using the spear as he was with the sword. Fortunately, his current cultivation level allowed him to use anything and wield it effectively as a weapon. He could even pick up a branch or a random flower and use it in battle, so a spear wasn't going to be that difficult for him. Add to the fact that the saint-killing spear was an already exceptional weapon to begin with, and Zen was assured to be a mean, killing machine. However, as he held the spear, he couldn't help but notice that it seemed to pulse with some kind of hunger, as if it was desperately seeking for something only Zen could provide. He didn't think there would be something so strange with this weapon when he first took it. The spear was alive. It felt like a starving man who hadn't had anything to eat or drink for 3 days and was hoping for Zen to feed it. The saint-killing spear has been possessed by the demon Night Queens. I guess the energy to activate it is not life vitality but faith energy. I don't have either, but I guess I could try with the chaotic energy, he thought to himself. Zen extracted a stream of chaotic energy from his body and allowed it to circulate through his meridians before pouring it into the spear. Crack! The spear erupted with explosive sizzling sounds as Zen infused the chaotic energy into it. As all this was happening, Malachi had already unleashed his spear lights. However, how could he ever hope to defeat Zen so easily when the latter had already activated the 8 smoky melodies? Zen successfully dodged Malachi's attacks every single time. Malachi couldn't help but be stunned when he heard the sizzling sounds erupt from the saint-killing spear. What's happening? He murmured in puzzlement. Zen couldn't answer him even if he wanted to. He himself was also completely at a loss. All he did was pour the chaotic energy into the spear, which quickly devoured all of it at once. Was it still not enough? He thought to himself in astonishment. Zen had no idea what just happened, but he now had a faint understanding of the saint-killing spear. It seemed that the weapon was an absolute glutton who couldn't be readily satisfied with the already concentrated chaotic energy. Good thing Zen's chaotic sea wasn't small and he could pour even more chaotic energy into the hungry spear. He didn't think too much of it. He simply poured the chaotic energy into the spear again until he thought that it was enough. Once the weapon felt more or less stable, he then thrust it out with his left hand towards Malachi. Whoosh! The chaotic energy it consumed formed a huge spear shadow beside the saint-killing spear. The shadowy spin was a spear skill of the saint-killing spear. It was the type of weapon that did not need an owner to cultivate a special skill. All Zen needed to do was feed it in order to activate its skill set. It hurt to admit it, but this enormous spear shadow cast by Zen was far beyond any of the spear shadows Malachi had ever used. Malachi couldn't help but look surprised as he stared at his opponent. Zen's shadowy spin was, in fact, 100 times stronger than his. Malachi could just feel it. And this was the first time Zen had activated it too. Was he seeing things? He definitely wasn't. How in the world did this happen? Malachi naturally understood the saint-killing spear since it had been his weapon, but he was at a loss for its current behavior. He didn't know why it made those exploding sounds earlier, nor could he understand how it was able to manifest such a powerful shadowy spin. From his experience, the spear shadow born out of the spear was entirely dependent on the amount of life vitality poured into it. Even if Malachi emptied out his entire life vitality sea to activate the spear strike, it still wouldn't achieve the degree of power Zen currently managed to manifest. No, this is impossible, he roared in frustration. Nothing is impossible, Zen said with a smile before thrusting the saint-killing spear towards Malachi. The majestic illusory spear shadow spun like crazy and headed straight for its former master. Malachi once used the power of the shadowy spin to create a small hole in the city wall, but the one Zen manifested would no doubt be able to destroy it entirely. There was no way he could block it. Flee, this was the only thought in Malachi's mind. But there was no way out. Zen wasn't going to let him go that easily. In the end, Malachi had no choice but to get swallowed up by the spear shadow and perish. A red light then quickly flew towards the city, containing Malachi's soul. The rules might have changed, but revivals were still centralized in the city. I still don't get any illusion points. Malachi has 3 exemption medallions. I have to kill him 4 times if I want to get his points. Zen thought to himself as he followed the red dot and charged straight into the city. He would kill Malachi as soon as he revived. Inside the city, the battle was getting even way more intense. Everyone seemed to be fighting. The strong warriors that had just recently returned from the Hall of Causality, some ace talents, and ordinary warriors in general were all fighting against one another. The city had once been protected by the rules of the heavens, but less than 5 minutes after the lifting of the fight prohibition, the entire city had been reduced to nothing but broken rubble. Boom, bang, crash, law powers shot out in all directions, and anyone who was not careful enough would no doubt get hit and die without even knowing what or who killed them. On the other side of the city were numerous round balls of light, symbolizing the warriors who were about to be resurrected. Beside these balls of light were a group of warriors who waited for the revival of their vanquished opponents, ready to repeat the cycle and kill them all over again. This was the fate that weaker warriors were doomed to have, an endless cycle of being killed and resurrection. All of their illusion points would be squeezed out of their bodies until there was nothing left. Chapter 1298, Who ranked first? Zen's aura immediately attracted a lot of attention as he flew into the main city. Those who noticed him wore obvious looks of astonishment on their faces. His fight with Malachi was still fresh in their minds, and Zen was now regarded as a sort of unbeatable monster in everyone's eyes. Zen, on the other hand, merely glanced at them as he flew over their heads. These warriors collectively had around a few 100,000 illusion points. There was no need to waste his time with these low-level people. His target was Malachi, and it was going to stay that way. Malachi's red dot flew and landed on the west side of the main city. Zen was in close pursuit and saw the dot expand and turn into a person-sized mass of light. The round of heavens was powerful, but it was impossible for it to instantly revive and reconstruct the countless warriors that were currently dying in this citywide massacre. Malachi would have to wait for a bit before his body was fully reconstructed. Those who entered the illusion battlefield were currently enveloped by the light of the heavens and only needed to project their bodies inside it. However, Zen wasn't quite sure why the equipment carried by the warriors couldn't be carried over after their bodies were projected again. He held his sword in one hand and the acquired spear on the other as he waited near that mass of light. He didn't have to wait long. Soon enough, the light began to fluctuate and a reconstructed person began to step out of it. Zen smiled and brandished the spear as soon as the figure appeared. Malachi didn't even have a chance. The moment he stepped out, Zen was already waiting for him. The young man was quick to kill him without any problems. It was incredibly frustrating on Malachi's end. Whoosh! Malachi's points, however, still did not burst out. The red dot, containing his soul, immediately flew towards the other side of the city. I have killed him 3 times, so his exemption medallions should have all been used up, Zen thought as he immediately chased after the red dot again. It was the same cycle. Malachi revived and Zen quickly ended him with a spear strike. The 3 exemption medallions had all been used up and his accumulated illusion points were immediately cut in half now that Zen was successful in killing him for the 4th time. Buzz, buzz, buzz. Zen drew back his spear and readily absorbed the massive surge of illusion points in his body. The sight of so many illusion points attracted everyone's attention. The amount of illusion points in front of them could no doubt elevate a low-ranking warrior all the way to the top 100 of this supreme world. Of course, these points already had an owner. Since Zen killed Malachi, then all these points would naturally go to him. None of the warriors dared to take his points away, since they knew that Zen was already doing them a huge favor by not targeting them. However, Zen didn't seem to be too interested in these illusion points. His eyes were instead fixed at the red dot that contained Malachi's soul. The dot flew away to a corner of the city and Zen was immediately in close pursuit. Each time he killed Malachi, he would be entitled to half of his accumulated points. Zen had no plans to stop until he bled Malachi dry of all of his illusion points. A large amount of points had come out of his body just now, so there was no doubt that he still had a couple of million points stored within him. And Zen wasn't wrong. Malachi had a total of 70 million illusion points. His death by Zen's hands halved it into 35 million points. Right now, he was ranked 2400th in the illusion battlefield and 47th in the supreme world. It wasn't so bad. At least he was still in the top 50. However, he still couldn't rest easy. How could he escape when Zen was still chasing after him? If he died a 5th time, then he might completely drop out of the top 50 and lose the opportunity to enter the second stage of the illusion battlefield. An ace talent like him, who couldn't even make it into the top 50, would be an absolute disgrace. He couldn't allow that to happen. Not if he valued his dignity. Zen, you're going too far. He shouted through the ball of light. However, Zen simply ignored him. So what if he was going too far? He was determined to milk Malachi dry of all his points. The moment the warrior was resurrected, Zen once again pierced him with the spear and let him be engulfed by the spear shadow manifested by the shadowy spin. Puff! For the second time, a huge amount of illusion points burst forth from Malachi. The number of points had been reduced by half, about 17 million, which meant there were still around 17 million points in Malachi's body. Whoosh! There was no way Zen was letting go of his prey. He once again followed the red dot and prepared to kill him for the 6th time. Zen, if you stop killing me then I can let Haley off. Malachi roared. He couldn't really affect the Saint Spear's exposition, but Malachi knew he could still control Haley's fate. She was his only bargaining chip right at this desperate moment. He was now out of the top 50, but if he could keep at least 10 million illusion points then he still stood a chance in catching up to the rankings. Puff! Zen did not respond and simply pierced Malachi with the spear, like he did a few times before. I can really let off Haley, he repeated weakly. There's no need, Zen said flatly. He was no fool. There was no way he was going to believe that Malachi would do good on his promise. Some grudges ran too deep to be let off so easily. Zen was determined to bring Lavender back to the Demon Knight and punish all those bad guys. Malachi only had around 8 million illusion points left in his body. Once again, Zen's eyes flashed as he followed Malachi's red dot. The 7th time he was killed, Malachi was left with only around 4 million points, not even enough to enter the Hall of Causality. The 8th time had him with only 2 million illusion points left. The 9th time, 1 million. The 10th time, 500,000. Each time he killed him, Zen got less and less illusion points from Malachi. Such was the rule. After the 12th time of dying, Malachi had a little over 100,000 illusion points left, which was a far cry from his initial 70 million illusion points. His ranking also dropped from 4th all the way down to the 8,000th. To say he felt disappointed was an understatement. Zen, Haley shouted. Behind her were Janet and the others. In the midst of the chaos, the 5 of them formed a team and fought their way into the city. Through the power of teamwork, none of them died and they even managed to get themselves a considerable amount of illusion points. Nobody was really brave enough to attack them, but they could easily attack others. The weaker ones were the first to fall and had no chance to fight back with all the other stronger warriors hunting them down. Zen stopped and looked at Haley. I've already taken all of Malachi's illusion points. Haley breathed a sigh of relief. I saw it. Are you mentally prepared? He asked her. She hesitated for a moment. Even if I have to receive the punishment of eternal night, I will still bear it. I will work hard to live on. I still look forward to that day. The punishment of eternal night Haley just mentioned was a completely terrible thing that only the Demon Knight members would know. Zen shook his head. I won't let you wait for so long. His words left a deep impression on her and Haley's eyes simply shone as she looked Zen. People generally feared pain and frustration. However, such things were easily endurable by warriors. No, what people truly feared the most was the idea of hopelessness. Amber, for example, was someone who needed hope to survive. She was on the verge of collapse and her imprisonment did not make things any easier for her. It was only with hope that she drew the power to survive. Zen was someone who could promise them what they all sincerely hoped for the most. He was not a man who casually made promises. Each time he did, he felt an immense pressure to live up to his word and keep it. However, even if he hadn't made a promise, things had already gone this far, and Zen didn't think he would be able to sit idly by and watch this all happen without doing anything. It was at this moment that Zen finally found the time to check his ranking and the results slightly shocked him. He was now in the top 100 and was ranked 77th in the illusion battlefield. And he was ranked 2nd in the Supreme World. The illusion points he got from Malachi obviously were a huge deal in elevating his place in the rankings. But if he was 2nd, then who was the 1st? Chapter 1299, Who is that woman? Now the competition for the rankings in the illusion battlefield reached the most intense stage. The name and ranking of each warrior showing on the pyramids in the outside world continued to change erratically. The outside world became quite fascinated by it, and everyone had their favorites among the participants. Lawson's in the 1st place. Unbelievable, didn't he previously rank the 200th? Nathan is now back in the top 3. That was quick. Who is Zola? I've never heard of this name before. The person is now in the top 10. This is crazy. Being in the top 100 in the illusion battlefield would be a great achievement. The warriors who made it to the top 100 were considered as the top talents of the universe. All the creatures in the universe paid attention to the names that would make it on the list as they were rooting for their respective races. The entire illusion battlefield was divided into 50 supreme worlds, and each supreme world had many mighty warriors in it. But until now, these warriors had yet to face each other. Thus, at this point in the competition, it was still undetermined how these warriors would rank in terms of strength and power. Meanwhile, as Letitia was supplying her life vitality, she kept looking at the names on the pyramid. When she spotted Zen's name among the top 100 warriors, she felt at ease. Based on her knowledge about the illusion battlefield, she could comprehend her husband's current state and prospects. Each warrior competing in the illusion battlefield aimed to be on the top 100 list. There was a lot at stake in being one of the best in this competition. The top 100 warriors were favored by the universe. Those who made it to the list were highly valued by their respective races because it was believed that the future godly geniuses would be born from these people. And from those godly geniuses would the true gods be born. Letitia recalled hearing from Zen about the world of chaos. It was the first time she had ever heard of such. And what was exactly the world of chaos? Letitia didn't know, and when she asked Zen about it, he wasn't certain about it either. She did her research, and from what she learned, she concluded that the world of chaos was the godly way. However, Letitia didn't know that her understanding of the world of chaos was quite shallow. Most of the warriors in the entire universe lacked deeper knowledge and understanding of the world of chaos. From what they knew, after the arrival of the world of chaos, talents would spring up like wild mushrooms. In effect, the talents would no longer be rare. If the universe became saturated with talents, the standard for such would become higher, discerning the less impressive talents as ordinary. But how could one be considered as a talent? A talent possessed an innate gift. They had mastery of incomparable skills amongst their peers. An ordinary warrior could master a skill through rigorous practice and perseverance, while a talent could easily unleash that potential once they embraced their gift. Thus, if the number of talents in the world of chaos was to increase, those born as ordinary talents would no longer be considered as talents. In the current universe, the only considered true talents were the ace talents of the major powers and races. These were the ones who had already activated the Mahayana lotus flower. Only when their Mahayana lotus flower had reached the perfection state could they become godly geniuses. Then, they would have the possibility of becoming true gods. And aside from the possibility of becoming true gods, these talents also carried the destiny of the universe. But as the world of chaos continued to evolve, a crisis was always bound to happen to the universe sooner or later. Even the best warriors could not escape the crisis brought by the evolving world of chaos. All the past grand eras fell into the hands of the inevitable crises. A grand era would last for 3.6 billion years, and every grand era had suffered its crisis. In the last era, for example, stars had fallen, and the fire demon had descended. While in the grand era before that, a plague erupted like God's punishment. And the crisis from 3 grand eras ago was the stars falling and hitting the universe, killing millions of creatures. No one could predict what the crisis would be for a grand era and when it would come. Unfortunately, there were no historical records of the crisis that had happened 4 grand eras ago, because it wasn't until the last 3 grand eras when the historians started to record the crises. Still, the recorded crises from the previous 3 grand eras were far from being complete and accurate. After all, the crisis could wipe out a civilization, which would result in the extinction of the grand era. Thus, only a few things would have been passed on to the next grand era. Which force does Margaret belong to? How did she get to the 60th place? Someone exclaimed. Letitia started to feel frustrated about the result. How could Margaret best Zen in the illusion battlefield rankings? I'm afraid I am not familiar with her. However, I heard that this woman has some strong background. If my memory serves me right, she seems to be from the Purple Power World, someone replied. Purple Power World, Purple Power Body, so that's how it is. Letitia remembered that Margaret possessed the Purple Power Body and that she had once controlled several great swords with her astonishing power. But what Letitia didn't know was that the Purple Power World had a say in the upper world, that Margaret could rank in the top 100 in the entire universe. Whoosh! Letitia was in her deep thoughts when the shadow of a whip suddenly flew towards her. Pock! The shadow of the whip exploded before Letitia's face. Although the whip did not physically hit her, the force from the blast pierced towards her like a sharp knife. But in an instant, ice crystals formed on Letitia's face. The ice crystals were arranged with certain distance from each other, forming a special protective layer of life vitality. Crack! The knife-like force hit the ice crystals instead. The explosion was so strong that the ice crystals cracked open, revealing Letitia's fuming face. Letitia could regenerate her body from any damage. But that kind of strong explosion would have given her quite a damage, and it would take a while before she could recover. She was grateful for the protection of the ice crystals, because if not for those, her face would have been cut open. What do you want? Letitia suddenly stood up, her face full of rage as she stared at the middle-aged woman not far away from her. Although she served here by pouring her life vitality into the illusion space of the pure jade sacred place for free, she was not a slave. The middle-aged woman who attacked her with a whip looked at Letitia with a cold smile. I already said it before, no one is allowed to speak here. But here you are making the same mistake over and over again. For now, this whip served as a warning. If there's a next time, it won't be just this whip anymore. We were only discussing in a low voice, and it did not affect us pouring our life vitality into the illusion space. Just so you know, there are also other people talking here aside from me. Why are you always targeting me? Letitia asked in a cold voice. The middle-aged woman pinched the whip in her hand, and a disdainful smile appeared on her face. The people around you, let me remind you of who you are. You are just a warrior from the lower world. What qualifications do you think you have to compare yourself to others? A jerk like you. Right at that moment, a black broken blade came spiraling over. The speed of this broken blade was extremely fast, and it was almost unavoidable. It flashed several times in the air, and before the middle-aged woman could react, it had instantly cut off her right arm. Arg! The middle-aged woman let out a scream like a pig being butchered as blood spurted from her freshly severed arm. The other warriors pouring their life vitality into the illusion space witnessed what happened, but their expressions didn't change much. Instead of rushing to the middle-aged woman's aid, they just stood to see what would happen next with rapt attention. To a warrior, losing an arm was not a rare occurrence. However, it wasn't common for a warrior to hurt another one in this place. For someone to dare hurt the middle-aged woman, it only meant that the person must have a very high status in the pure jade sacred place. After all, the Saint Lord of the sacred place was present at that moment to observe the pyramid above the illusion space, so there was no way an ordinary warrior would make a move here. It would be like signing their own death. Who are you? What did I do wrong? The middle-aged woman held onto her wound with a bewildered expression on her face. She was a smart woman who knew that whoever attacked her here was not someone she could afford to offend. It was just that she hadn't done anything wrong, so why did that someone have to break her arm? Why? The middle-aged woman could only ask the warrior because she was not convinced that she deserved to be punished like this. Soon, a person walked out of the space. This person was at the spirit transformation realm, and many warriors could recognize him. He was Preston, a palace leader of the pure jade sacred place. He could be considered one of the top 100 ranked figures of the sacred place. I cut off one of your arms just to warn you. Don't be so rude again, Preston said with a cold expression. He then turned to look at Letitia. When his eyes met hers, a gentle smile crossed his lips. His cold face immediately disappeared without a trace, as if he had met the bright sun. Are you Letitia Ning? Letitia was astonished. She had not yet recovered from seeing the middle-aged woman's arm being cut off, and now this. This man was far superior than the middle-aged woman, and his cultivation was unfathomable, so why was he being so polite to her? Ever since she had ascended to the upper world, she had been looked down upon. She had received all sorts of unfair treatment that had left her feeling extremely regretful. If she had known earlier that a Soul Sea Realm warrior meant nothing in the upper world, she would not have ascended. Yes, I am, she answered truthfully. Would you mind coming with me? Preston asked politely. He was still wearing that gentle smile on his face. Letitia felt strange, and it could be seen on her face, but she still nodded slightly. Of course, but I still need to infuse my life vitality into the illusion space. You don't have to. Please, if you could just follow me, Preston said with a smile. Therefore, Letitia immediately left this place and followed Preston's lead. Everyone saw Preston personally lead Letitia away. Naturally, when Preston and Letitia had finally left, they all began to talk about her. Who is that woman? Why is Master Preston so nice to her? Well, come to think of it, she's a real beauty. I bet that some big shot from the pure jade sacred place has taken a fancy to her. I don't think so. If mere beauty could take us anywhere, then why are there single beauties still working here? As for the middle-aged woman, she stared as Letitia slowly disappeared from her sight. She was left grabbing onto her amputated arm, gritting her teeth in pain and rage. Chapter 1300. Letitia joined the sacred place. Letitia followed in Preston's wake, feeling anxious. With her bright intelligence, how could she not understand the situation in which she found herself? She was someone who had ascended from the lower world and lacked any foundation in the upper world. So what good would come to her, when facing those enormous odds? There was only one possible hope for her, and that was Zen. However, with her understanding of the situation, she also knew that Zen could hardly look after himself. He was indeed very famous in the universe, but his fame had not come from aligning himself with a certain power. Furthermore, he seemed to have offended a lot of great powers. Although Preston was extremely polite to her, she was not sure if the situation would play out in her favor or not. It might be a good or a bad thing. What Letitia feared greatly was that if she fell into the hands of the pure jade sacred place, she could be used as a bargaining chip against Zen, which was what she didn't want to face. However, she had no way to avoid it. After circling around the hall, she arrived at the square in front of it. At this moment, all of the core members of the pure jade sacred place had gathered on the square. 32 palace leaders, various hall leaders, stewards, elders. The combined aura which these warriors exuded was abnormally strong. Even the least of them was at the spirit transformation realm, and there were also several warriors whose strength was unfathomable. Letitia was at the soul sea realm, and those warriors that she could not evaluate were at least a half step away from becoming world lords. These warriors also shifted their gazes onto Letitia. There was curiosity in their eyes as they focused on her, reading her talent and potential. Is this woman really Zen Luo's wife? He is also from the lower world. It's not impossible for him to have a wife and children in the lower world. However, the possibility of her pretending to be his wife is even greater. Pretending to be his wife. We'll wait for the Saint Lord to use his soul theurgy to see if she is really Zen Luo's wife. She'll pay a heavy price should she be lying. Seeing Letitia being brought forward, the warriors on the square all began discussing her. Now that the battles in the illusion battlefield had reached a new level, everyone was especially concerned about the rankings. The strongest core talent of the pure jade sacred place, Josiah Shen, had also entered the top 70,000 rankings, and his ranking was still rising rapidly. According to everyone's expectations, Josiah's achievement of reaching the top 100,000 was already considered extraordinary. But now that he had reached the top 70,000, the upper echelons of the pure jade sacred place were naturally all surprised. After all, they were only a 10th grade sacred place, and in the entire universe, there were hundreds of thousands of 10th grade sacred places like theirs. Of course, Josiah's results were incomparable to Zen's. With Zen's current advancing ranking, the entire Humanity Alliance would place great importance on him. After all, in the 3,000 supreme worlds of the Humanity Alliance, there were less than 100 people who were skilled enough to reach the top 10,000. Under the visual scrutiny of so many mighty warriors, Letitia felt a little uneasy. In the end, she followed Preston and they soon stood in front of an old man wearing a Taoist robe. The old man sat still on a rattan chair, his gaze fixed on the pyramid on top of the illusion space. Then Preston bowed to him. Saint Lord, I've brought her here. The old man was the Saint Lord of the pure jade sacred place, the ruler of this sacred place. Upon hearing Preston's words, the Saint Lord slowly looked away. It was probably because of the cultivation method which he used, but he looked exceptionally old and his movements seemed incredibly slow. However, his wrinkled eyes contained a pair of brightly shining pupils. He glanced at Letitia and asked in an aged voice that crackled with authority, "Are you really Zen Luo's wife?" The warrior who had been staying by Letitia's side was also a warrior of humble birth, but he had been born and bred in the pure jade sacred place. After finding out about Letitia's background, he treated it as an opportunity and immediately reported it to his superior. He hadn't even imagined that this matter would attract the attention of the Saint Lord of the pure jade sacred place. His superior had promised to give him a lasting reward if Letitia was really Zen's wife. The warrior could not pass up this opportunity. Yes, I am. I came to find my husband, Letitia answered boldly. The Saint Lord nodded slightly, while his lively eyes scrutinized her. Look into my eyes. The moment Letitia looked over, she felt that her eyes were captured, and she could not look away from the old man's eyes. It was as if her whole body had sunk into their mysterious depths. This was his soul theurgy. Letitia immediately realized what was happening. However, with her low cultivation level, how could she resist the soul theurgy of a Saint Lord? She was powerless to oppose him. However, other than feeling her eyes being forcibly locked onto him, she didn't feel any further discomfort. Not long after, the Saint Lord wearily closed his eyes. Letitia's body suddenly trembled at being released, and she heaved a sigh of relief. A few of the mighty warriors of the pure jade sacred place also turned to look at the Saint Lord. He then slowly stated, Zen Luo had ascended to the spirit reading world of our Humanity Alliance when he came to the upper world, and he was then sent to the Mist Palace to cultivate. He is an important member of our Humanity Alliance. Since you are his wife and you've had the good fortune to ascend to the pure jade sacred place, you will naturally be placed under my protection. Previously, Zen had been sent straight to the Mist Palace. If you are willing to, I can also assign you to the Mist Palace. Even though the Saint Lord was old, he could clearly read the complex situation unfolding. If Zen hadn't climbed up to the top of Illusion Battlefield, the Saint Lord wouldn't have bothered to do this. At most, he would have sent people to investigate and then help to settle Letitia in. Even though Zen had made a name before, he had only been known for the power of the Fairy Palace. Now he had fully proven his strength, and he held the 77th ranking in the Illusion Battlefield. In the world of chaos, if Zen continued to grow, he would definitely become an extremely important figure in the Humanity Alliance. If he could go further, he would only need a single event to launch his becoming the main character in this world of chaos. This had extraordinary meaning and boundless potential. Once that happened, it was certain that his achievements would surpass those of even Supreme Lord Illusion. Protecting Zen's wife was a piece of cake for the pure jade sacred place. However, this act of kindness could potentially gain his gratitude. Even a fool would become wise and do such a thing. The Mist Palace? Letitia asked, as curiosity sparked in her clear eyes. The Saint Lord nodded. The Mist Palace is one of the most cherished cultivation places of the Humanity Alliance. Only the most outstanding warriors can set foot there. Thank you, but I am not going. Letitia shook her head. I think I will stay here and continue to wait for Zen. Hearing Letitia's reply, the Saint Lord had a faint smile form on his face. You can certainly stay here. Once the contests in the Illusion Battlefield are over, I can inform Zen of your location by using a roaring token. But you know how dire his situation is right now. Several major races hold grudges against him, and they are not willing to let him go. He might be trapped in that fairy palace for a long while. I understand, Letitia nodded. Thank you very much, Saint Lord. She bowed her head respectfully. The Saint Lord added in a courteous tone, no problem. It's just a small matter. In the meantime, you can train in our pure jade force house. Preston, take good care of her. Preston's eyes lit up at the Saint Lord's decision. Everyone would be willing to do this kind of thing. It was not a difficult thing to accept Letitia as a disciple. Forgetting her talent, everyone knew that Zen had a promising future. It would not be a bad idea for Preston to help Zen's wife. It could then earn him Zen's gratitude and perhaps even his friendship. Besides, the Saint Lord had already used his soul theurgy to confirm that this woman was indeed Zen's wife. A warrior could have many women on his travels, but he only had a single wife. She was likely of great importance to him as well. But I don't want to cultivate right now. Letitia's gaze turned upon the pyramid. I want to stay here and watch the rankings. This is just a small matter. I will stay with you to watch, Preston said with a smile. He purposely found a good spot on the square for her. Only now did Letitia become an official disciple of the pure jade sacred place, and she was even allowed to step into the very core of the sacred place, the pure jade force house. When Letitia had first heard about the pure jade force house, she had also yearned for it. She had still been considering whether her husband was qualified to enter, but now, the Saint Lord had allowed her to enter the force house simply because he knew of her relationship with Zen. At this moment, Letitia felt lighthearted, and it was as if she had stepped into a dream. What had her husband done to make the warriors in the upper world think so highly of him? Obviously, she didn't know about Zen's performance in passing the torch, nor did she know that the few Supreme Lords in the Humanity Alliance were all silently watching his every move. Amazing. Looking into the distance, she saw Zen's name. He was now ranked 77th. A proud look set her face to glowing. Unknown to me, he's already reached this point. Letitia recalled that when she had first met Zen, he had only been at the nature level. A myriad of emotions flooded her at this moment.